Muchas
Very
gracias
well.
de nuevo a todas y a
Thank you
todos
again
en
for being here today.
este espacio, principalmente a nuestro
Mainly, we'd like to
grupo de
thank
panelistas,
our
que
panelists.
tenemos como mucha alegría de tener
We are
un
very
panel
happy
tan
to have
diverso, tan
you
rico
here
en
today.
términos de
Such a
los
rich
países,
panel
de las regiones,
regarding the countries, the
de
region
las regiones del continente latinoamericano que
of
nos
the Latin
acompañan,
American continent,
para hablar de un tema que
to
desde
talk
Forum
about
Civ
a
nos
topic
interesa
that
mucho
from
y que
Forum Civ
consideramos que es
we're
muy
very interested,
relevante,
and I think it's
viene
very
siendo muy
relevant,
relevante. No
has
es
been
nada nuevo
relevant
decir que
the
en las
past years
agendas globales
in
y
the global
de acción que
agendas
hay que tomar,
and the
no
actions
solo desde los
that have to
diferentes
be
países, sino
taken,
como
not
planeta,
only
como
from the
especie,
different countries, but
cada vez
all the
tiene más
planet as
fuerza,
a whole,
pero que desde
is
Forum Civ
getting
consideramos
stronger.
también que
And in
en el
Forum
momento que
Civ, that
vive
we
el
consider that
planeta y que
when
viven muchas
the
regiones del
planet
planeta,
and many
con tanto
regions of the
ruido, tanta
planet, you can
convulsión
see it with
y tantos
such a
problemas, este
turmoil,
tema de
with
la
so
justicia
many
ambiental y
problems.
climática
And this
tiene y
environmental
debería tener un
justice,
lugar muy
climate justice,
importante
should have
para
a very
articularlo también con
specific
todo lo que
point
pasa
to articulate
y que
this with
en las
everything that's
agendas y en
happening
la
and
opinión y
the
en las
agendas,
narrativas se plantea
opinions,
más en términos de
narratives.
guerras,
It's
eh,
talking about more wars,
xenofobias, discriminación,
xenophobia,
pobreza,
discrimination,
etcétera, etcétera, etcétera.
poverty,
Para
among
nosotras
other
y
things.
nosotros desde Forum
But
Civ
for
estamos
us from
convencidos que el tema de
Foreign
la
Civ,
justicia
we're
ambiental y
convinced
climática
that the
atraviesa todas esas
environmental and climate
narrativas
justice
y las
goes
atraviesa
through
de
those
una forma que
narratives,
también
and it goes through
em,
these narratives in a
creemos
way
que
that
contiene las luces para
we believe
encontrar
that
los
has
caminos y las
the
alternativas
ideal
para hacerle
lights to
frente
continue
a
with
esas
our
cosas
work
a las que se
to
refieren
really
esas otras
tackle
narrativas.
those specific things.
Venimos aquí a aprender realmente
So
desde
we're here
Forum
to
Civ como
learn.
plataforma de organizaciones de
Forum
sociedad civil
Civ
sueca,
is
como una red
a
de organizaciones y de actores
platform,
de sociedad civil.
organization, network of the
Estamos
civil
muy
society,
interesados
and
en
we are
seguir
very
aprendiendo y
interested on
compartiendo y
continuing
conociendo
to
lo que se
learn and
hace
to
en la
sharing with you
región
what we're doing in
frente
the
a estos
region, what you're
temas
doing
y
in the
por
region,
eso hemos
facing these
querido
topics.
facilitar este
Therefore, that's
espacio
why we
como
want to
parte
enable
de
this
nuestro
space as
cuarto
part
foro regional
of our
de
fourth
sociedad civil,
regional forum of civil
repensando los espacios
society,
cívicos,
rethinking on these
que tiene varios
civil
eventos. En nuestra
spaces that
página
has
web
several
podrán
events. In my
encontrar algunos de
webpage,
los otros
you
eventos,
can see
algunos
all our
presenciales, pero muchos
events
virtuales que
in
estamos
person and
realizando
also the
durante
virtual
estas
ones that we are
semanas,
doing
comenzando
during
esta.
these weeks. This is the
Y
first
bueno,
one.
dejo ahí
So,
para no
without
extenderme.
further
De nuevo, muchas
ado,
gracias, bienvenidas y
I would like
bienvenidos
to
todos.
thank you
Esperamos que
again
sea
and welcome. I hope
una
this
mañana para
is going to
nosotros y
be a
nosotras
very
aquí en América
productive
Latina,
morning
tarde para quienes están en otros
for those who
lugares
are
del
in Latin
mundo,
America,
de
in
mutuo
the afternoon for those
aprendizaje
who
y
are
de
in the rest of the world.
enriquecimiento y de
So
inspiración sobre
I would
estos
like to
temas
thank you
que,
for being
vuelvo y digo,
here.
nos parecen
And
sumamente
these topics
relevantes
we're going to
en las
talk
agendas de la
about
sociedad
today
civil
are
para América
very
Latina y el
important to
Caribe.
be embedded
Sin más
in the civil
que decir,
society's agenda.
le
Without further
cedo
ado,
la
I would
palabra
like to
a
hand the
nuestra
floor
querida
to
Claire
our
McAllister.
dear Claire
Ella es
McAllister.
investigadora
She is
del
a researcher
Instituto de
from the
Investigación de
Institute
Paz
of
Internacional
Research
de
of
Estocolmo, CIPRI, por
International
sus
Peace in
siglas en
Stockholm.
inglés. Ella puedo decir que
And
viene
I
liderando
can
desde hace
say
ya unos
she's
años
leading for
un
a couple of
proyecto
years,
muy
for many
interesante de
years, a very
investigación del
interesting
CIPRI,
project
que es
in
Environment
CIPRI,
on Peace, Ambiente
Environment on
sobre la
Peace.
Paz o en relación a la paz. Y bueno,
Environment
nos
regarding
alegra
peace and
mucho
peace.
también
So
contar
we're
con
very
Claire y con el
happy
CIPRI
to have
como
you
parte
here
de
with
este
the
evento para
CIPRI as part
moderar
of
la
this event
conversación con
to
nuestros y
moderate this
nuestras
conversation
panelistas que
today.
ya Claire
And with our
introducirá.
panelists, so Claire will introduce the panelists.
Bienvenida, Claire.
So
Muchas
welcome,
gracias.
Claire, and thank
La
you
palabra
so
es tuya.
much for being here. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you for that introduction. And yeah, great to see so many people joining us for this conversation today. As you said, we've been leading, I've been leading the Environment of Peace initiative, and we were very happy to come to Colombia and to Brazil earlier this year to launch the report for policymakers and to talk about some of these questions of environment and climate justice when we're discussing the intersection between peace and security and climate change and wider environmental degradation. And in addition, some of my colleagues at CIPRI have been working with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Bogota over the past year to convene a regional working group on climate change, the environment, peace and security in Latin America. And we'll shortly be publishing the sort of findings and recommendations from that work. But one of the key topics that stood out in the conversations at that working group was very much about the importance of understanding the role of climate and environmental justice in the context of conversations about peace and security within the region. Just some practical matters before we kind of get going. One is just to remind you, if you joined late, that there is translation available into Spanish, Portuguese, and English. So please just press on the globe button at the bottom of your screen if you haven't already, to choose the relevant language. I'm going to try and ask questions for about the first 35 minutes of this conversation, but then I would really like to have some questions from the audience. So please feel free to write those in the chat, and you can write them in any language, well, any of those 3 languages that you feel comfortable with, and we will field them accordingly. If they're for a specific panelist, please try and make that clear when you write your questions in the chat. Just a little bit of context, and I don't think I probably need to say this, but you know, the ecological diversity of the Latin American region is probably unparalleled, but it also means that it means the region is very susceptible to the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation. And while the region is only responsible for 7% of greenhouse gas emissions, it's one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The complex set of climate and environmental challenges sort of transcend some of the national borders just because of the nature of the ecological landscape, but they also have far-reaching sort of implications for both the local communities that live in those places, but also then global ecosystems that are really reliant on some of the rich biodiversity and ecology within the region. But those challenges are kind of intersected with social inequalities and political instability. And the region itself stands out as one of the most violent in the world. And it's one of the places, it has the highest number of environmental conflicts. It's a hotspot for environmental crime. And many of these conflicts are linked to the extraction of natural resources, which often intersect with other criminal economies. And involve a number of non-state armed groups. And this all means that Latin America is one of the most dangerous regions for environmental defenders, and that communities and environmental defenders are often subject to violence and to human rights attacks. Today, I think what we want to try and do is have a conversation about how environment and climate justice has really emerged, both as a way of communicating some of these intersections and complexities, but also about a way of mobilizing action to try and address some of the climate and environmental challenges that are facing the region. But what we also want to do is try and explore how unified is that perspective on environment and climate justice within the Latin American region? To what extent does it mean different things to different communities and to different depending on where you sit? How much is it unified across the region? And within that, how far is it, to what extent is it then shaping what policy action or what change different groups and different organizations want to see? So we have a great set of panelists, and I'm going to try and make sure that I introduce each panelist as I go. So first, I would like to turn to Sandra. Sandra is from Guatemala. She's responsible for climate change and risk management at ASECA, which is a member organization that works with rural and excluded populations through training, capacity building, reconstitution of ancestral practices, accompaniment, advice, and advocacy. So Sandra, hi, welcome, good morning. I would like to start with how you understand the term kind of environment and climate justice, and how is that relevant to the work that you do and to the communities that you are working with?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so
Claire.
much. clear.
Buen día a todas y a
Good morning to
todos.
you all.
Agradezco mucho
I would
a
like to
Forum
thank
por la
Forum
invitación que
Civ
nos
for the
han hecho.
invitation.
Ya lo decías, mi nombre es Sandra
Yes,
Miguel
I'm Sandra
y
Miguel,
represento a la
and I
Asociación de Servicios
represent
Comunitarios de Salud
the
ASECSA.
association
Somos una
ASECSA.
organización
We are
miembro de la
organization member
Convergencia Maya Guapipié
of the
en
Maya
Guatemala.
Convergency in Guatemala.
Entonces,
So
voy a comentar
I will like to
con
start by
relación tal vez
saying
más a las vivencias y
regarding
a la práctica
our
que nosotros
practices
experimentamos desde el
that
acompañamiento que
we
damos a las
have
comunidades rurales,
accompanying the
especialmente
rural
con población
communities
indígena, ¿verdad?
and indigenous population.
Previo a hacer como ese
Prior
énfasis a lo
to
que
doing that
nosotros identificamos en las
emphasis as we
comunidades, de cómo
identify
se
in the
entiende
communities
y cómo
and
se
how it
aborda
is
también la
understood and
justicia
how it
ambiental y
is
climática,
approached, the
quisiera
climate and
referirme
environmental justice, I would
bueno,
like
a
to
los debates tal
briefly
vez y las
refer to the
discusiones que han
debates and the
habido en relación a
discussions
este tema,
around
¿verdad?
these
En
topics
Guatemala y en
in
la región,
Guatemala
y en
and in the
donde
region.
logramos
And
nosotros
where can
comprender
we really
que
understand
el tema de justicia
that
ambiental y
justice,
climática, bueno, ha
environmental and
habido un
climate
esfuerzo
justice, this has
importante
been a very
de poder
important effort
encontrarle un
to be
sentido, ¿no? Y
able
un
to find
concepto. Y en este
a
caso nosotros lo
concept,
entendemos como
a
un
meaning,
derecho a
and this
vivir en un
we see it as
planeta
a
donde
right
el
to live in
sistema
a
ambiental y
planet where the
climático está
environmental and
libre de la
climate
interferencia del ser
justice
humano que causa
is
peligro a los
free
seres
of the
humanos y
human
a los ecosistemas,
interference
¿verdad? Y hay
to
un
take
punto
care of the
importante que quiero
ecosystems. This is a
resaltar de
very
este
important
concepto que ha
topic that
estado
I want to like
resonando
highlight
mucho,
because
y
this is
es
very well
que
mentioned,
se
and it is
alude
the
mucho
fact
a
that
que las cargas y los
uh,
beneficios sean
the
distribuidos
benefits and the
equitativamente,
charges
¿verdad?
should
Ese
be
es un
equitatively
concepto que nosotros
distributed.
hemos
So
escuchado
this is a
mucho y que se
concept that
promueve
heard a lot and
principalmente desde
promoted
las
mainly
organizaciones,
from the
¿verdad? Sociales que
organizations,
hacen un
social
acompañamiento
organizations
también a
that are
las
doing a
comunidades.
monitoring in the communities.
Contrapuesto
On the
a
other
este concepto,
hand,
nosotros quisiéramos
we
tal
would
vez
like
enfatizarnos
maybe to
a un
empathize
concepto
to
más desde la cosmovisión de
have
los
a
pueblos indígenas,
cosmovision of the
¿verdad? Y
indigenous
que en
peoples.
parte de
As
principios, yo
part
creo que
of
para
the
las personas que
principle
estamos
for the
acá,
people who are here
tal vez
today,
no va a ser extraño,
I think
¿verdad?
it's
Algo
not to
que yo voy
be
a
too strange
mencionar, que es lo que
because I'm going to
vivimos y que
mention
logramos
something what
identificar
we
en
lived
algunas
and we were
particularidades de
able
los
to
pueblos indígenas,
identify
porque
in
tienen
the
una
indigenous
visión de
peoples because
vida
they have the
muy
vision,
diferente,
a very
¿verdad?
different vision
Los planteamientos que muchas veces se quedan tal
regarding,
vez, podríamos decir, un poco
we could
cortos.
say
En este caso, el
the
planteamiento
concepts
de los
are a little
pueblos
bit
indígenas
lagging
nos habla de
behind
principios y
compared
valores
because
milenarios,
we're talking
y
about
esos
millennial
principios y
values,
valores
and these
milenarios desde su
principles, millennial
cosmovisión se
principles from their
interpretan
cosmovision
como
are
la
interpreted
convivencia que hay entre el
as
ser humano
the
y el cosmos, ¿verdad?
well-being
Entonces no estamos
between
viendo
the
solo al
human
ser
being and the
humano como
cosmos.
tal,
We're not
sino
seeing
es
just
más
the human being
profundo,
as is, but
porque se
it's deeper
aborda
because
desde
it's
horizonte del
approached
buen vivir,
from
y
the
ese
horizon of the
horizonte del
good
buen
living,
vivir
and
es un
that
concepto
good
ético, ¿verdad? Que
well-being is an ethical
propone una vida
concept proposing
relacional e integral, y ahí
life that is
ya vamos viendo
integral
los
and in
elementos de
relationship with
profundidad que
each
tiene la
other. So
cosmovisión de
that
los
is the
pueblos,
depth of the
porque esto lo
cosmovision of the peoples
argumentan desde la
because they
correspondencia,
talk about
desde la
from the
complementariedad,
correspondence,
dentro de la
complementarities,
reciprocidad,
and
la armonía y la
reciprocity,
ciclicidad.
harmony,
Y eso es
and
importante, ¿no?
cyclicals.
Porque
This is
se
very important
sustenta en
because
una visión
it
un poco
is
más
based on a
profunda, en
vision,
donde
a
ese
deeper
derecho que
vision,
había
where that
mencionado desde el
right
principio no
mentioned at the
solamente
beginning
lo aborda para
not
el ser humano,
only
sino para la
is
madre
for the
tierra
human
y el
being,
cosmos, ¿verdad?
but
Que
also
es
for the Mother
algo
Earth
que
and the
en
cosmos,
la
something
población
that the
indígena
population,
lo
indigenous
ve para
population,
poder
can
lograr
see
en
it
realidad
really to be
una
able
vida
to
totalmente en plenitud.
obtain a
Entonces, eso
very good
se
life.
va
So
construyendo
this is being
desde el
built
bienestar colectivo,
from
y
the
eso es lo que nosotros
collective
logramos
well-being,
resaltar
and
desde lo que vemos en la
that's what we
práctica,
want to
que
highlight because we see it in
potencia ese
practice
equilibrio
that
entre el ser
promotes the
humano, la madre tierra
balance
y
of
el
the human
cosmos. Quisiera yo
being.
resaltar eso
So I would like
porque es
to
muy
highlight this
importante
because it's very
partiendo de
important
esa
starting
cosmovisión que
from this
nosotros vemos.
cosmovisions
Pero
that we see.
también
Now,
debemos de reconocer
we
que
have to
todo
also
esto está siendo
acknowledge that
lesionado,
this
¿verdad? Por
is
lo que tú
being
ya misma
damaged
mencionabas,
by
vemos
what you already
nosotros cómo ha
mentioned,
habido un exterminio de esta
because
misma
there's
práctica y de esta misma
extermination of
concepción
this
y desde
practice
muchos
and of
tiempos
this
atrás, ¿no? Desde el
concept
tiempo de la
from many
colonia, desde el
years
tiempo de la
back, not from
industrialización,
the
en donde
colony
se
period and
plantean sistemas
industrialization, but
capitalistas
before, where they have
neoliberales que realmente
capitalist
atentan
systems
con
and
contra
neoliberal
estos
systems,
derechos de
and
los
they are fighting
pueblos
against
indígenas
the
y
rights
contra
of the
su
indigenous
visión de vida
peoples
también, ¿no? Porque
and against their
hemos
mission
visto
of
sí, una
profit, because we've
pérdida
seen a
de este
loss
tipo
of
de
these
práctica
types of
por esa misma
practices
imposición
due
y
to
por la
that
misma
imposition, and
también,
also due
podríamos
to,
decir,
we can
opresión que
say,
tienen los líderes y
oppression
las
that
lideresas,
the
que son
leaders
los
have,
defensores de su
which are
territorio.
the defenders of
Entonces,
the territory. So
podríamos decir que lo
we
que
could say
nosotros
that
miramos acá
what
dentro
we
de la
see
cosmovisión
here
de los
in
pueblos
the
nos da
cosmovision of
esperanza
the
en realidad de que se
communities gives
puede
us hope
reconstituir
that this
y
can be
que los
rebuilt,
pueblos que
and
están ahora
the
en
peoples
resistencia,
that are under
defendiendo su
resistance,
territorio, su
defending
agua,
their territories,
tienen
their
un
land, their water,
sentido de
have
pertenencia, de no
a
perder esa
sense of
visión de
belonging,
vida,
to
¿no? Que
not
es más
lose that
compleja que
way of
ver
life.
solamente el derecho del ser humano.
So this is very complex. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think I would really like to now go to Ideval. You're a biologist and an indigenous person from Brazil, and that you're working with a number of socio-environmental projects in the southern region of the Amazonas. And I'd really like to get your take on what you just heard from Sandra. How much does that resonate, both in terms of providing a kind of concept and meaning around some of these pre-existing kind of concepts that have existed for a long time, but also that it's about providing some kind of hope about rebuilding and sort of a connection with like the human nature connection, which has long existed and maybe been slightly lost within our sort of modern societies.
Com certeza,
Of
enquanto
course.
a Sandra
Yes, I
falava,
was listening to
eu
Sandra, and I
sentia
do
aqui
feel
o mesmo
that
pertencimento de narrativa, né? A gente vê
the
nos povos que a gente
well-being, and when
trabalha,
we see the communities with we
essa,
work with,
essa
that
cosmovisão que
cosmovision they
traz
bring,
eles para mais próximo da
they're
natureza,
very,
para
very
mais
near
perto,
nature.
uma proximidade que dentro da
And
cidade que você
you
não
cannot
enxerga
see that
isso,
in
né?
the urban
É
areas.
mais dentro
So
das
among the
comunidades
communities, you
mesmo,
can see
é
that.
dentro
And in
desse
that
contexto que
context,
foi criado por
created for
muitos
many
anos, há muitas
years
gerações,
on and
né? A
many
gente
generations. So
aqui, não
I'm
vou
not
entrar
going to
muito em
enter into
detalhes, mas
detail, but
eu
I
sei que
know that
a gente,
in
na
Brazil, in
Amazônia,
the
a gente
Amazon,
tem,
we
tanto no Brasil
have
quanto na região amazônica, existe
there
um
is
corredor
a
onde os
corridor
indígenas utilizavam, e onde
which the
passava esse
indigenous
corredor,
peoples
existem
would
grandes cidades
use.
indígenas ou grandes aldeias, grandes
There were many
comunidades.
towns.
Então,
So
assim, há
there are
muitas
many
gerações eles já
generations
existiam aqui, eles já
using
estavam ocupando esse
that
lugar
corridor,
em
and
grande
in large
quantidade
amounts
e
in
também
communities,
produzindo
producing also
grandes quantidades
large
também,
amounts
né? Porque
of
se fala
products and
muito
everything.
em não existia
We say
nada,
that there
não
wasn't
existia
anything in
produção,
there, but
mas
no, there
mesmo assim
was a lot of people
você
living there.
vê, né, em
And there are
estudos
studies
que
that
existia
show
sim,
that
que a produção
the
alimentava todas
production
essas
would feed all
famílias
the
e
families.
que a
And
gente, dentro
inside
desse
that
contexto, a
context, we
gente
can
consegue se
be able
enxergar,
to
né?
really
Muita
see the
perspectiva de futuro,
perspective
muita
of
perspectiva
future, the perspective
de
of
restauração. E a gente
restoration. And
sabe
we already know that
a
nature
natureza ela é
is
resiliente,
resilient.
sempre
It's
vai
always
ser, né?
going to be
Independente até de nós seres
independent of
humanos,
what we can do,
porque a
because
natureza
nature
não é
is
só a
not.
gente
The fact is,
se coloca, né,
we
acima das
cannot be
demais seres
above
do planeta, mas a gente
everyone
está
else.
todo
We are
mundo no
all in the
mesmo, os
same place,
animais, né,
but nature
todos no
is
mesmo
above
grau. E a
us.
gente, como um ser, né, que
We
se
are just
diz
one
muito mais
being.
consciente,
We
a
have to
gente
be
deveria
aware,
estar
and we should be
protegendo, né, e
protecting
defendendo
the environment.
esses
And that's
outros
why
seres,
the
né,
importance of
que
this
também estão
concept
habitando
of
aqui nosso
environmental
planeta, também
justice.
precisam desse
So
oxigênio, precisam das
we
florestas
need
para
the forests to produce, to
tanto
live,
viver, se
to
reproduzir e
reproduce, and to
continuarem
continue
existindo,
existing.
né, junto com a
So
gente
it
também.
is aligned with
Então,
us.
dentro das
Inside the
comunidades
communities,
você
we
vê muito
see
essa
that
coisa de conviver junto com os
living
seres,
together
né,
with the
de não
beings.
existir
We
essa
didn't have that
separação entre o ser
separation
humano
among
e
the
aquele
human
porco e
being
aquela
and the
coisa, o
environment,
respeito que
because
eles
it's
têm,
a
né, pela
respect. It's
alimentação
a
deles
respect
também, pela caça,
for the
pelo
for the
pescado, né?
home, for the
Então,
fish, for the
assim,
land. So
inclusive a
we
gente
think that
também, quando chega para
when
trabalhar
we
nesses
start working in
territórios,
these
né, entrando aí nessa
territories,
coisa de como que a gente tem atuado, é, a gente sente que a
we
gente está
see
indo fazer o que,
that
tanto
we
da parte técnica que a gente
are
sente, né? Por
applying
exemplo,
or our
um
knowledge,
método agroecológico
but
mais preparado e muito mais, benéfico para esse
We are
ambiente,
preparing that
tanto
in a
tecnicamente, a
way
gente
it's
sabe disso,
going to benefit
cientificamente,
the
o
environment.
conhecimento tradicional
And
também diz a
traditional
mesma
knowledge
coisa, né?
does
Que
the same
você
thing.
fazer uma
To do
agroecologia é muito melhor do que
agroecology
você
is
fazer
much
uma
better
monocultura, como a
instead of
gente tem
doing
no
a
estado de
monoculture.
Rondônia, né? Então,
So
assim, a
we
gente
believe
acredita que a gente está
we are
seguindo, né,
following the guidelines
um
and
trabalho
the
que
work that
realmente
really
tem
has
esse
the
objetivo
objective,
e tem
has the
também
objective
abrçado junto
of
com as
taking care
comunidades
of the communities,
uma coisa
and
de trabalhar de fato o que vai ser bom
this is going
tanto
to
para
be very
agora
good
quanto para o
for
futuro,
today
né?
and for the
Garantindo de
future,
fato essa
to
sustentabilidade,
guarantee
né? Tanto para
sustainability
as
for the next
próximas gerações,
generations,
quanto para a gente que ainda
and
está
for us who are
aqui
still
e
here
precisa
and we need to
existir, né?
exist.
Não sei se eu
Is
respondi
it
tudo.
okay? Back to you, Claire.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Isabel. And I'm, really hearing, this really important concept of understanding nature as above us, nature as the sort of something that we cannot kind of, I think you said nature is much more resilient than humans, and I think that really came across. Maria Cecilia, I wonder whether you can maybe, so I guess both Isabel and Sandra have talked about the positives of understanding this concept and how it sort of unites a number of different kind of existing concepts within different indigenous peoples and communities. I should introduce you first, though. Maria Cecilia currently teaches at the Universidad Franz Tamayo and is an associate researcher at the Universidad Privada de Bolivia. So you are, I think, an expert on Bolivian environmental law. And I really wanted to now bring kind of what are some of the benefits, but also limitations of this concept of environmental and climate justice when it comes to then taking it from the sort of grassroots communities and the understanding of the concept into actually trying to advocate for change, either at a legal level or within different kind of national or regional policies. Kind of what do you see its benefits, but also what do you feel are some of the limitations in the concept?
Muchas gracias, Claire.
Thank you
Un
so much, Claire. It's a
gusto,
pleasure to be here
estar con
today. Thank you for
ustedes
the
el día de hoy,
invitation
compartir
and to
este
share this
espacio
space with you.
Con todas y todos ustedes. Bien, mira,
I do
creo que uno
think
de
that
los
the
principales
main
aportes
contributions
del
of the
concepto de justicia
concept of
ambiental es que nos
environmental
permite
justice is
visibilizar
that
de
it
principio
helps
las
us to
desigualdades.
visibilize inequalities.
Cuando
When we
hablamos de
talk about
justicia,
justice, we
tenemos
have to
que
see,
ver o referirnos
we have to refer
automáticamente
to
a
the
conceptos
concepts
como
like
la distribución equitativa, no igualitaria,
equitative
equitativa de
distribution,
responsabilidades, de cargas,
responsibility,
de derechos, ¿no?
rights,
En función de las
regarding the
necesidades
needs
y de las
and
responsabilidades de
responsibilities
los
of the
sujetos.
subjects. Unfortunately,
Lamentablemente, creo que ahí salta una de las
there are
limitaciones.
limitations
Cuando
when we
entendemos
understand
sujetos,
subjects.
estamos
We are
normalmente
thinking
pensando en
in
estados, en
states,
instituciones,
institutions,
en
in
personas,
people,
y quedan
and
dentro de un
they are
concepto
in a
muy
very
estricto.
rigid
Por
concept.
fuera,
They're
esto que han estado
outside this
comentando
concept are
los
what
panelistas, las
panelists are
panelistas que me han precedido, ¿no?
mentioning.
La
Nature is
naturaleza, por
left
ejemplo.
outside.
La justicia se queda
Justice
con una
has only a
visión bastante,
vision.
justicia ambiental,
Environmental justice
en un concepto muy tradicional, muy
limited in
limitada
this concept
al
to
antropocentrismo y al Estado y
anthropocentrism
sus
and the state of
instituciones, y
institutions,
quedan por
and
fuera,
are
por
staying
ejemplo,
outside concepts
conceptos que
that
no
are
son propios
not
de este
proper
concepto de
of this
justicia ambiental, que
environmental
puede ser mucho
justice
más
that can be much
occidental,
more
como el
Western
equilibrio y
as
la armonía con la
balance, harmony
naturaleza, que
with
se
nature
refleja en el
reflected on
paradigma
the
del vivir
paradigm
bien
of
o del buen vivir,
well-being
y
other
otras alternativas
alternatives,
al desarrollo,
other
otras
visions
visiones o
or
cosmovisiones de
cosmovisions
nuestros
of our
pueblos
indigenous
indígenas
peoples. So
en
in
este
this
lado
part of the
del
world,
mundo,
at
por lo
least.
menos.
I think
Creo
that
que aparte
apart
de
from
este
this
tema
formal
formal, ¿no? O tal
topic,
vez primero dentro del
inside
tema
this formal
formal del
topic
concepto de
of
justicia
environmental
ambiental,
justice,
uno
one
de
of the
los problemas
problems
que
that we have
tenemos es el
is
rezago
the
en la
delay in
implementación
the
del
implementation
concepto
of
más
the
allá de
concept.
una nueva restricción,
Not just a
que
simple
es
restriction, to
reducirlo
reduce
al
it
tema
really to the
jurídico,
legal aspect.
¿no? Se entiende
We
justicia
understand
ambiental como
environmental
ir a los
justice to
tribunales
go to the
judiciales y
judicial
obtener
courts and
sentencias
have
a favor de la
rulings in
naturaleza o
favor
de
of the
proteger elementos de la
nature
naturaleza o
or
comunidades
human
humanas
communities
en relación
regarding
a su
their
dependencia
dependency
con la
with nature.
naturaleza, ¿no? Ahí los
Now,
marcos
the
jurídicos de nuestros países
legal
son más
frameworks
o
are more
menos
or less
protectivos
protective
o
or
reconocen más o
acknowledge
menos
more or
los
less
derechos
the
intrínsecos de
intrinsic
la naturaleza,
rights of nature,
pero
but
se entiende
it's
estrictamente ahí.
understood
Justicia ambiental
just
no
as
se
is.
está entendiendo,
Environmental
y probablemente
justice
ese es uno de
is
los
not being
desafíos,
understood
en, por
in
ejemplo,
like
políticas
public policies.
públicas, cómo
How
las
can
políticas
public
públicas se
policies are
traducen en justicia
translated
ambiental,
in environmental
cómo los
justice? How
proyectos,
the
las acciones,
projects,
las
actions,
intervenciones de los
interventions
distintos
of the
niveles de
different government
gobierno
levels
se van
are
a
going to
transformar
transform
o van
or
a
are
tomar
going
como
to take
principio
the
la justicia
principle
ambiental.
of
Es
the
decir,
environmental
cómo
justice,
van a
how
tomar
they
en
are going
cuenta
to
las
consider
desigualdades.
inequalities.
Vamos a
So
hacer un
we're going to do a
proyecto de
project
perforación de
of
pozos, extracción de aguas
oil
subterráneas
perforation
para
for the
las
communities,
comunidades,
for example, but
pero
we do
no
not
tomamos en cuenta
consider
las
the
desigualdades intrínsecas
intrinsic
en las
inequalities
comunidades, ¿no? ¿Cuál
inside
es
the
la realidad
communities?
de
What
las
is the
mujeres
reality of
indígenas, de
indigenous
los pueblos
women,
indígenas, de las mujeres
indigenous
campesinas en
peoples,
estos
the
proyectos?
peasant
¿No?
women
Ahí
in
entra
these
ahí
areas?
podría
We
entrar y
can
operativizarse el criterio de
understand
justicia
there
ambiental,
the
que
environmental
creo que no se
justice.
está
This
haciendo.
is not
Se
being
maneja
done.
el tema de
We
género,
talk
se
about
maneja las
gender,
interseccionalidades,
intersectionalities,
pero no
but
como
not
tal el
as
principio de
is
justicia
the
ambiental.
term of environmental
Creo
justice.
que entonces
So
debe
it
dar un
should
salto
give
en ese
really a
sentido,
leap in that
traducirse en
sense in
políticas
local
locales, en la
policies,
planificación
planning of the
territorial, en la
territory,
asignación de
allocation of
presupuestos,
budgets,
en la
in the
distribución de
distribution of responsibilities
responsabilidades,
too,
¿no? En los
in the
distintos
different
niveles,
levels,
porque hay
because there are
diferentes
different
desigualdades entre los niveles de
inequalities, government
gobierno, los
levels,
pueblos indígenas, sus
indigenous peoples or
autoridades, sus niveles
authorities,
de jurisdicción o de
jurisdiction levels,
autonomía
autonomy,
o de
or
autogestión.
self-management. So,
Por
on the
otro
other
lado,
hand,
creo
I think
que,
that
bueno, a mí me quedaba un tema que
there's a
cuando hicieron la
once you did the
presentación tuya, Claire,
presentation, Claire,
me hizo
it
algo de
made
ruido, y
me
es el tema de
think
paz y
the
seguridad,
peace and
¿no? Cómo se ve
security,
la
how
justicia
environmental
ambiental
justice is seen
o se
or
refleja o interactúa
reflected
en los
with
conceptos de
these
paz y
concepts of
seguridad.
peace and
Y
security. And
creo
I
que ahora,
think,
por lo
at
menos
least
en
for
mi
me, in
país,
this
es
country,
algo
this
muy
is very visible
visible el tema del
in
creciente
the
conflicto
growing
y la
conflict and
violencia que se está
violence that is
suscitando
happening,
en
ongoing here
relación
regarding
al
the
acceso a la
access to
tierra,
land,
a
to the
los territorios de los
territories,
pueblos
the
indígenas,
indigenous peoples,
vinculados
linked
con
to
los
the
nuevos
new
asentamientos humanos que se están
human
promoviendo, sobre todo de sectores o por
movements
sectores afines a la
that
agroindustria,
are
porque
going
se busca
because they're
suelo o
seeking
expansión
for
del suelo o
soil to
crecimiento de la frontera
produce,
agrícola
to really have
para
agriculture
ese
activities
propósito,
for
¿no?
that purpose. So
Y
this
eso
is
está generando
generating
avasallamiento de áreas
uh,
protegidas, incendios
a lot of
forestales,
burnings,
avasallamiento de pueblos indígenas o de
dislocation
territorios
of
indígenas
indigenous
de
territories
manera
so
pero muy
very
violenta,
violently. This is
¿no? Son
happening. This
intervenciones
is
armadas, son
armed
personas armadas, han
interventions. They have
secuestrado, han
really murdered
asesinado
people
personas
in
en
the
los
past
últimos
24
24
months
meses
in
en
my
mi
country.
país, y es
And this
sumamente
is very
preocupante la creciente
worrying,
violencia vinculada al acceso a la
this
tierra.
violence
Otro
regarding the
factor
access to
igual de
land. Another
violento
factor is
es
the same as violent
otro sector es la
is
minería
illegal
ilegal,
mining,
que está
because they're
utilizando
using
o
a
muchísimo
lot of
mercurio en
mercury in
Bolivia.
Bolivia.
Bolivia se ha vuelto el
This is
primer
the
país
first
importador de mercurio a
importer
nivel
of
mundial,
mercury
con el
worldwide
impacto que
here.
esto
And the
representa en la
impact this
salud de las
has in the
personas,
healthcare
en
of
la
the
naturaleza,
people,
en
the
los
nature, the
ecosistemas,
ecosystems, not
no solo
only
de
of the
las comunidades
communities
directamente afectadas,
affected,
sino de
but
toda la
also
población
the
en general.
population as a whole.
Y
So
estos
these
sectores,
sectors,
estos sectores
social
sociales
sectors, mining
mineros,
sectors, are
están operando de
operating
manera
in a violent way.
violenta y
And they
están
are
armados,
armed.
están
They are
intimidando a las
intimidating the
comunidades
communities,
indígenas,
indigenous peoples,
y eso
and
es
this
muy
is very
preocupante también, ¿no?
concerning.
El
The
Estado no
state
ha
has not
podido
been
o
able or
no ha
hasn't had
tenido
the
la capacidad
capacity to
de
really
poder
face
enfrentar esta
these
situación.
issues. So
Entonces,
I think
creo
that
que la justicia
environmental
ambiental puede
justice
dar
can
mucho de
give a
sí, ¿no?
lot,
Aportar en
can
esto,
really give a lot,
pero
but
debemos
we have to
enriquecerla
enrich it more,
rescatando estos
rescuing
otros
these other
conceptos, o
concepts
tal vez
or
nutriéndola o
feeding it
complementándola
with
con
these
estos
concepts
conceptos de
of
equilibrio, de
balance,
armonía,
harmony, because
porque en la
in the
cosmovisión de los
cosmovision of the
pueblos
indigenous
indígenas en
peoples, at
Bolivia,
least
de
in
la mayoría de ellos,
Bolivia,
el
the
criterio que más prima es el
criteria
equilibrio y la
is
armonía, la reciprocidad y
also
la complementariedad con la
reciprocity and
naturaleza,
that
¿no?
relationship with
Estos
nature. These
conceptos que no
concepts that not
necesariamente son
necessarily
justicia
are
dentro del criterio
justice in the
occidental,
Western
nos
Hemisphere. They
aportan
really
elementos
contribute
que
with
pueden
elements
ser
that can be
útiles
useful
para llegar a un
to
tipo de
arrive to a
justicia,
justice, quote unquote,
pero desde una
but
visión
it's
mucho más
a
biocéntrica,
most
¿no?
biocentric
Creo
concept.
que hasta ahí
This
mi
is what I
aporte
wanted to say,
inicial.
Claire. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for talking about kind of the narrowness in which this concept is sometimes understood vis-a-vis some of the kind of breadth with which it should be kind of conceptualized, and also some of the challenges around implementing this beyond some very narrow legal concepts into kind of policy and how you operationalize the concept. And maybe, David, I can turn to you. David is the coordinator of the biodiversity area of the Sobrevivencia AT in Paraguay, and that's an organization founded really dedicated to socio-environmental research, management, and action. And maybe I can ask you a little bit about, I mean, please feel free to comment if there's anything in terms of conceptualization you disagree, but I mean, I'm particularly interested in that question around how is this concept then being operationalized or acted upon in Paraguay? Do you feel it's helping in your work, either from a policy perspective or from an kind of a mobilization perspective? To what extent is it supporting the work you do and enabling change on the ground?
Okay, muchísimas
Thank
gracias,
you very
Claire.
much, Claire.
Muchísimas gracias a
Thank you
todos
very much
por la
for the
invitación.
invitation. It's
Un
a
placer
pleasure to
compartir este
be
panel con
here
mis
today
compañeros y compañeras que
with
están
my
aquí presentes.
colleagues and
Antes que
panelists.
nada, comentarles que
I do
coincido
agree
plenamente con las
100% with
intervenciones
interventions of
de
Maria,
María, de Ibel,
Ideval,
de Sandra.
Sandra.
Es exactamente
This is
lo que se está
exactly what
haciendo
we
y lo que se
see
debe hacer.
and what we should do.
Un poco nuestra
Our
narrativa en
narrative
cuanto a justicia
on
climática y ambiental
climate
sería el
justice
acceso a
should
los
be the
bienes comunes
access
de la
to
naturaleza
nature
y la construcción y
and
el
strengthening
fortalecimiento de la
of resilience
resiliencia en las
in
comunidades
the communities.
campesinas e indígenas, que son las
These are the
comunidades
communities
más
that are much more
vulnerables
vulnerable
a este
to
sistema
this agro-export
agroexportador
system
y corporativo que
that we are
estamos
living
viviendo
here
aquí en la República del
in the
Paraguay y
Paraguayan
la región.
Republic.
Este modelo
This
obviamente va
model
totalmente en
is
contra
against
del
the
precepto de las
idea of
comunidades
the
campesinas indígenas, ¿verdad?
indigenous peoples and
Es un modelo
communities. This is
avasallador,
a
como bien ya lo
model that
decía
is
María,
overwhelming, as
es
Maria
un
already
modelo
mentioned,
concentrador de tierra
who
y
is
territorio,
focusing only
y es un
on the
modelo que
land
expulsa a comunidades
and
campesinas e indígenas
taking
de
out
sus
these communities
territorios
from their
ancestrales.
ancestral areas.
Territorios
These
que
territories
lo
were
manejaban de
managed
una manera
by them
totalmente
in a sustainable
sustentable,
way,
acorde y
in
en
harmony
armonía con el
with the
territorio,
territory.
¿verdad? Es un territorio
It's a
biodiverso,
biodiverse
Paraguay es un
territory,
territorio biodiverso, rica
very
principalmente
rich
en territorios que
in
producen
territories that
agua
produce
dulce, que
drinking
hoy se
water,
encuentra
that today
fuertemente
is being
amenazado estos
threatened
territorios por este
by
modelo
this
agroexportador. Y
agro-export
cuando hablo de este
model. When I
modelo
talk about this
agroexportador,
model,
estoy hablando
I'm
principalmente de los
talking about
monocultivos de
monoculture,
soja,
soy,
trigo y
maize,
otros
among
eventos
other
que
events
son
that are
transgénicos.
transgenic.
En el
In
Paraguay
Paraguay
hoy
today,
tenemos
we
el
have
90%, 95%
95%
de los cultivos de
of
OGM de monocultivos son
monoculture
transgénicos,
are
¿verdad? Y esto tiene un
transgenic,
impacto
having a huge
gravísimo,
impact, negative
principalmente en las
impact
comunidades
in
que
the
hoy
communities.
estas
And these
comunidades están siendo
communities are being
expulsadas de sus
taken out of
territorios,
their
¿verdad? Porque estamos
territories.
hablando de
We're talking
seguridad,
about
¿verdad? Y hoy estas comunidades
security,
están viviendo
and they are
inseguridad porque
living
están
that
siendo,
insecurity because they are
siendo
being
expulsados
expelled
de sus
from their
territorios
territory.
y están siendo
They are being
expulsados
expelled
con
with
policías, con
police
militares,
officers,
¿verdad?
military
Por
officers,
parte de
and
personas que quieren
on behalf of
adueñarse
people
de
who
ese
want to
territorio
really own the land
para
and
convertirlo en
to
grandes
convert that in
campos
large
de
fields
soja
to plant
y de
soy
ganado, ¿verdad? Que son los
and beef.
las principales
So
actividades que me atrevo a
these
decir
are
que
the
son las
activities
responsables de
responsible
la
for
deforestación y el
deforestation
deterioro de los territorios
and deterioration of the
en
territories
el
here in
Paraguay.
Paraguay.
Entonces,
So
nosotros,
what do
¿qué
we do?
hacemos en el Paraguay?
What are
¿Qué
we
estamos
doing in
haciendo como
Paraguay?
Sobrevivencia Amigos de la Tierra Paraguay? ¿Qué estamos haciendo como miembros de
We are
la
being
Federación Amigos
members
de la Tierra
of the
Paraguay? Porque
Federation, as
seguramente
you already
Danilo
mentioned.
va a hablar más de ese trabajo
It's a
internacional y
regional,
regional que
international
hacemos.
work we do.
Nosotros lo que hacemos
And
es
we
acompañar
monitor
procesos
processes
de
of
restauración
restoration
de
of the
ecosistemas
ecosystem
con compañeros y
with
compañeras campesinos,
peasant
campesinas e
and
indígenas,
indigenous
¿verdad?
colleagues.
Principalmente
So
estamos
we are promoting
la
the
implementación de
implementation
sistemas
of
agroecológicos,
agroecological
¿verdad?
systems,
Porque bien
because
sabemos que
we
los
know
sistemas
that these
agroecológicos son
systems
los sistemas
are
que
the ones that want to
restauran
restore the
territorio, ¿verdad? La
territory.
agroecología, ¿qué hace?
Agroecology, what it
La
does
agroecología
is
enfría las comunidades, ¿verdad? Y aporta el
contributes
enfriamiento del
to
planeta con un proceso
decreasing
armónico, con
the
un proceso que
heat,
respeta los
respecting the
territorios, que
territories,
respeta la
respecting
biodiversidad y que por
biodiversity,
sobre todo
and
restaura
restores the territory,
territorio, rescata
rescues
semillas nativas,
native seeds,
comparte semillas
shares
nativas,
native
multiplica
seeds,
semillas nativas y
multiplies
por
these
sobre
native
todo
seeds, and
producen
produce
alimentos
food that
sanos,
is
alimentos
healthy,
sanos para las
healthy for the
comunidades
communities,
y alimentos
and
sanos
also
también
healthy
para
food
los
for the
consumidores
consumers, urban
urbanos, ¿verdad? Que
consumers
hoy
that today
también tienen
have
otra
other
mirada y están
points of view
acompañando
and are monitoring
fuertemente este
this process
proceso
very closely
de
of
restauración de
restoring the
territorio, de
land
defensa de los territorios a través
through
de la agroecología, ¿verdad? Que
agroecology.
es nuestro eje
This is
principal
the
de
main
trabajo cuando hablamos
line
de
of work. When we
justicia
talk about
climática.
climate justice,
Tenemos que
we have to
hablar
talk
del
about the
acceso al
access to the
territorio,
territory.
¿verdad? Y
And
ese
this
territorio
territory
debe ser un territorio
should be a very
sano
healthy
y un
territory,
territorio
mainly
principalmente
a territory that
ofrezca
offers
espacios de
learning
aprendizaje
spaces
de las
of the
comunidades,
communities,
¿verdad? Porque lo que nosotros
because
trabajamos, nosotros no llevamos la
we do not
receta,
have the
nosotros
recipe. We
construimos en forma
build
colectiva
collectively
un
a model
modelo que
that
restaure
restores
territorio,
the
un
territory,
modelo
a
que
model
recoja
that will
agua sana
recover
para
healthy
beber, para
drinking water
producir
to
y por sobre
drink, to
todo para
produce.
que
And in order for
tengamos
us to have
agua en este
water right
momento de
now, in this
crisis
crisis moment,
climática que ya
climate
estamos
crisis that
viviendo
we're
desde hace
living,
mucho tiempo,
but
pero
at
en esta
this time
época
and
se
day,
está
it's worsening.
empeorando los
The
efectos de la
effects of
crisis
the climate
climática, porque
crisis.
ya no
Now, we're
hablamos de
not talking
cambio
about climate
climático, hoy
change.
estamos
We're
hablando
talking
ya
about
de crisis
climate
climática, estamos hablando
crisis,
de crisis alimentaria y
food
estamos hablando de
crisis,
crisis
economic
económica y estamos hablando
crisis,
de crisis
and
en la
crisis
salud
in
de
the
la
health
población,
of the
¿verdad?
population.
Porque
Because
este
this
problema de la
problem
crisis
of the
climática
climate crisis
atrae
will
graves
attract
problemas
huge
y
problems and
enfermedades
diseases
hoy en el
today in
Paraguay
Paraguay.
y en la región.
So
Bueno, un poco
this
esa es
is
la
the
visión
vision
que
that we
tenemos.
have.
La justicia
Climate
climática también
justice
tiene
also has
mucho
a
que
lot to
ver
do
con los derechos,
with
con el
the
derecho humano, con
human
los derechos
rights
humanos y con
and with
la
the
defensa de los
advocacy
defensores que
of
ya se
those
habló que hoy
people who are
estos
defending the
compañeros y
territories.
compañeras que son
These
defensores de la
are colleagues that are
naturaleza
defending the
están
land are
fuertemente amenazados, sus
and
vidas
their
están
lives are
siendo
being threatened.
amenazadas y muchas de
And
ellas
many of those
han
people have
desaparecido, ¿verdad?
died,
A causa
have been murdered,
de defender
trying to defend the
el
territory
territorio y de
and trying to
defender
defend
la madre
Mother
tierra
Earth
y por sobre todo
and
defender
to
ese
defend the
acceso a
access
los
to the
territorios, ese
territory,
acceso a la
access to
alimentación
food,
y ese
and
acceso a las
access to the
semillas
native
nativas que hoy
seeds
también está
that
siendo
are being
sujeto de
subject
control por parte de
of
estas
control on behalf of these
corporaciones, ¿verdad?
corporations
Y que
and
está causando
are
estragos en
leading
nuestras
to have
comunidades.
very
La
negative
justicia
impacts.
climática es posible, la justicia
Climate
climática lo
justice
estamos
is
haciendo
feasible
y lo
and
estamos
we are practicing
practicando.
it. So
Entonces, es
it's
un
a
elemento
very important
fundamental
element
para la
for the
defensa de
advocacy
los
of
territorios,
the
para la
territory,
defensa de los
for the
habitantes de ese
defense and advocacy
territorio
of the
y
people who
para
live in
la
the territories,
defensa
and
del
for the
planeta.
good well-being of the planet. Back to you, Claire.
Bueno, eso es
Thank you so much. Thank
el
you
aporte
so much.
que quería dar y espero
Is it-
que podamos
I hope that we
seguir
can continue
debatiendo este tema
debating this
y
system
trabajando en
and working
forma colectiva,
collectively,
porque solamente el
because
trabajo
it's
colectivo,
a
el
collective
trabajo
work and
sinérgico va a hacer
synergies
posible
are
de que esto
possible, really,
realmente
in order
podamos
to really
instalar en el
install
territorio
in
y
the
que se haga
territories
justicia.
this climate
Bien,
justice.
decía María,
Maria already
hablamos de
mentioned
justicia ambiental, no
we're
estamos
not
hablando del punto
talking
de vista
about
legal,
the
estamos
legal
hablando del
aspect
punto de
when we
vista
talk about climate
de
justice.
las
We're talking about the
necesidades de las
needs of the
comunidades
communities.
y es lo que
And
tenemos
so
que
this is what
seguir
we have to
impulsando.
keep promoting. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, David. I think you really clearly set out this kind of the interconnection of kind of water crisis, food crisis, climate crisis, kind of health, and how all of these things kind of affect each other, and the understanding, this much broader understanding of kind of why we need to understand access to territory and to healthy territory to be important. It goes beyond just food production. This is about kind of maintaining this balance with nature and enabling a kind of healthy, well-being, healthy lifestyle for those within the community. I would like to come to you, Danilo. So you are a philosopher from the National University of Colombia and a regional facilitator for the Friends of the Earth, Latin America and the Caribbean. I would like to pick up on one of the themes that's kind of come through very strongly in the previous panelist presentations, and that's both this kind of the conceptualization, the understanding of environment and climate justice within the Latin American region actually is something that is different to the conceptualization of it in other parts of the world. And I wondered if you would be able to speak both to kind of how do you work with other regional organizations about these kind of questions, when some of those understandings or conceptualizations are slightly different. And I'd also like, if you would like to kind of comment on a lot of what the panelists are talking about comes back to sort of some of the economic models of global food production and some of these kind of much bigger social models which are creating some of these environmental pressures within the Latin American region, both in terms of some of the pressures in terms of kind of food production, some of the monoculture, and we know this comes from both pressures on things like biofuels, but we also know that it's pressure on kind of feed for cattle, a lot of the times for consumption not within the not within the region. So how do you kind of reflect on some of those kind of regional dynamics?
Muchas gracias, Claire, y
Thank you very
buenos
much, Claire.
días,
Good morning
tardes
to
y
you all.
noches a las personas que nos escuchan y nos ven desde diferentes lugares
I'm
del
very
mundo.
happy to
Muchas
be
gracias
here
a
today. Thank
Forum
you very much
SIP
for Forum
por
SIP
la
for the invitation.
invitación.
Well,
Yo,
first of
primero que todo,
all,
resueno
I
absolutamente con algunas cosas
resonate
que planteó
with many things
Sandra,
that Sandra
igual
already
que
mentioned,
plantearon
also
David,
with
Ideval,
David,
María
Ideval,
Cecilia.
and Maria Cecilia and
Y
Sandra.
en lo que planteaba
What Sandra
Sandra, Judith,
mentioned,
resueno
I
completamente con su
agree with her
perspectiva
perspective regarding
relacionada con la fase neoliberal del
neoliberal phase of
capitalismo que
capitalism
nos
that
da
gives
cuenta de lo que es la
the idea
injusticia
of what is
en
injustice
términos de lo
in
ambiental. Porque
environmental
yo creo que
terms,
es más
because it's
fácil
easier to
definir la
define
injusticia ambiental
environmental
que la justicia
injustice
ambiental. En tanto lo
than
que vemos en el día a
environmental
día
justice.
es la historia
What
de
we
las
see today,
guerras y
the
de las
story of
hambres,
the stories of the
producto de la
wars, the hunger
injusticia
as
ambiental.
an
Y
environmental
en ese
injustice.
sentido, yo
In
creo
that
que
sense,
desde
from our
nuestra visión como
vision
amigos de la Tierra, de América Latina y
here
del
in Latin
Caribe,
America and the
hemos venido
Caribbean, we
también
have been
discutiendo
discussing a
conceptualmente
concept
porque
because we do
consideramos
consider that
que
this
esa discusión
discussion, this
conceptual
conceptual
es
discussion is
fundamental
fundamental
siempre que parta de
if
la
it
praxis y
stems
de la
from the praxis, the
experiencia y la
experience,
realidad
and
de
the
los
realities of
pueblos,
the peoples,
porque
because
es
it's
muy
very
difícil
difficult to base
basarnos en
ourselves on these
discusiones
conditions, on concepts,
conceptuales cuando no
when they
dependen de
do
las
not depend on the
prácticas, cuando no dependen de
practices, on the
experiencias, de la
experiences
praxis concreta,
of
de la
the
vida de los
livelihood of the
pueblos.
people.
Y a veces se
And
pueden
sometimes
generar
we can
conceptos
generate
solamente
concepts
desde
from our
nuestras cabezas que
minds
pueden
that
ser
can
en
be in
algunos
some
casos muy
cases very
inteligentes,
intelligent, but
pero no
not
relacionadas con
related
las
to
prácticas
the real
concretas. Y en
practices.
ese
In that sense,
sentido, nosotras
we've
hemos venido
been
también discutiendo
discussing
lo
the
ambiental y la
justice and
justicia directamente
environmental aspects
relacionado
related
con la
to the
relación de intercambio
organic
orgánico entre los
exchange
seres
among the
humanos y la
human beings and
naturaleza. Y
nature. And I
creemos
do
que
think that
ahí,
there,
no
not in
en
the
la división
division
de
of
seres
human
humanos
beings
y la
and nature,
naturaleza,
but
sino más bien
more
como una
like one
naturaleza
nature
en la que
in
nos
which we
transformamos
transform
como
as
seres
human
humanos
beings
al transformar la
while
naturaleza
transforming the
externa
external
a nosotras y a
in nature.
nosotros. Y eso
And
nos
I
parece
think
clave
this is
porque
key
en
because
ese
in that
intercambio
exchange, that
que
we
hacemos los
do, the
seres
human
humanos como
beings, as
parte de
part
la
of the nature,
naturaleza, con
with
la naturaleza
external
externa a
nature,
nosotros y a nosotras,
with our external nature, we
utilizamos
use
como
as a
herramienta de ese
tool
intercambio el
the work
trabajo.
we do.
Y en eso
And
quiero
I
ser
want to be
enfático porque
even
es el
emphasize, because this
trabajo
is the
el que
work
nos
that enables
permite
us to
dignificar
dignify
nuestra
our
vida,
life,
transformando la
transforming
naturaleza
nature
para nuestra
for our
dignificación
dignifying life,
o
or
acabar
to
con
end
nuestra
our
vida,
life, transforming
transformando la
nature
naturaleza de una
in a
manera
way
que es la
that would be
explotación.
exploitation.
Y creemos que en
So
eso está hoy el
that
mundo de las
is
empresas
where the world,
transnacionales como agentes centrales
because the
del
companies
capitalismo y como agentes
are
que
agents
llevan a lo
that,
que me preguntas en segunda instancia, Claire,
regarding your second
que es
question,
a
Claire,
una
this is
visión
a vision of the
del
companies,
planeta y nuestra
and
región de
our
América
region
Latina y el Caribe como un lugar para
it's a
explotar
place to
a través
exploit.
de
This is
la
the view they have
agroindustria, a
through the
través de
industry,
el
through
modelo
the
minero-energético
mineral
y el modelo
model, energy
agroindustrial.
model.
Y eso yo creo que es
This
central
is
ponerlo en
fundamental to
discusión
put on the
cuando
table when
vemos
we see
una de las
one
regiones más
of the
biodiversas
biodiverse
del mundo
regions
y un
in the
país
world,
como
and a country
Brasil
like
en el que
Brazil,
en pocos
that in a few
años se
years
vuelve a caer
will
en
go
cifras
back
de
to
inseguridad
figures
alimentaria,
of
con toda la
food
capacidad de producción de alimentación de
insecurity.
un
So
país
with
como
a
Brasil
huge
o un
country like
país como
Brazil or
Colombia o un
Colombia
país como
and
México,
like
que en
Mexico,
última
that at the end
instancia
of the
llegan a
day,
esos
those
niveles
are the
por modelos
levels due to the
políticos que
political
favorecen la
models
participación de
that
las empresas
favor the transnational
transnacionales como
companies
agentes
as
centrales
central
de
agents of
entregar supuestas
delivering
soluciones que
solutions
son
that are
falsas a
false
través de la
through
agricultura
agriculture,
climáticamente
intelligent
inteligente,
agricultural
a través de
models,
supuestas
supposedly
nuevas
new
tecnologías
technologies
que
that
acumulan para el
accumulate for the
capital,
capital,
acumulan para
accumulate
agentes
for specific
particulares
agents,
y le
and
quitan a
take
la
the
posibilidad a la
possibility
gente de
out of
comer,
the people to
y le quitan la
eat.
posibilidad a la gente
They
de tener
withdraw
lugares
the
para
possibility
cultivar
of
y
them
le
to
quitan la
continue
posibilidad a
and
la
withdraw the
gente de
possibility
vivir
of the people
con
to
los
live
medios
with
de
the
subsistencia y en los espacios
livelihood
socialmente
and the
construidos
social
que
spaces built that
históricamente los
historically
pueblos han
that
generado.
these peoples have
Eso de una
generated.
parte. Y con
Regarding
respecto a
how
cómo
we work
trabajamos nosotros con
with other
otras organizaciones, con
organizations,
otros
with other
espacios en
spaces
la
in the
región, me
region, I think
parece
it's
genial
wonderful
tu
your
pregunta,
question,
Claire,
because
porque nosotras y nosotros desde
from
Amigos de la
Amigos de la
Tierra, América
Tierra
Latina y el
in
Caribe,
Latin America
hemos
and
entendido que la
Caribe,
única manera
we
de
have been able
construir
to
la
build
justicia ambiental es en la
this
alianza con
environmental
otras y
justice
con
with
otros. Es en la
partnerships
alianza con la Vía
with the
Campesina
peasants,
Internacional.
is in
Es
a
en la alianza con la
partnership
Marcha Mundial de
with
las
the
Mujeres. Es en la
women, with
alianza con
the
la Central,
communities,
la
partnership
Confederación
with
Sindical de
the
Trabajadoras y Trabajadores de
workers
las
in
Américas.
Latin
Es
America.
decir,
So
es
it's
en la
in
alianza
partnership
con
with
esos
these
movimientos
social
sociales
movements
que
that
también
also
tienen
have
visiones
visions
de lo
of the
ambiental
environmental
incorporadas en su
aspects
quehacer
in their
diario, en el
everything to
quehacer
do
del trabajo,
daily,
en el
what to
quehacer de
do
la
in the
lucha por la
fighting
justicia de
for
género y el
climate
desmantelamiento del
justice.
patriarcado. Es
It's
ahí
there where
donde
we really
constituimos
have the
la posibilidad
possibility
de caminar
to
juntas y juntos.
walk together.
Y en ese
In this
sentido,
sense
en ese espacio de
of
cómo
how we
trabajamos
work
con
with
esas
these
alianzas,
partnerships,
nuestra
our
base
base
es la
is the
construcción de la
construction of
justicia ambiental
environmental
siempre
justice
ligada a la
linked
justicia
to social
social,
justice, economic
económica
justice,
y de
and
género.
gender
No
justice.
creemos que
We
haya
don't think we
posibilidad de
can build
construir justicia ambiental si no
environmental justice
existe la
if we don't
justicia
have
en lo
justice in
social, en
the
lo
social,
económico y en
economic,
el género.
and gender aspects.
Entonces,
So
es sobre todo
this
un
is an
intercambio
exchange
de
of
saberes y de
knowledge and experiences
experiencias que nos
that can
permite
enable us
trazar
to
objetivos
have
políticos
objective
conjuntos a partir de la
policies based
confianza
on
y el
trust
trabajo
and
concreto
specific work
en los
in the
espacios de
spaces of
incidencia
political
política, en los
incidents,
espacios de formación
political
política y en
formation,
los
and in
espacios
the
en los
spaces
que
in which we
entendemos que
understand that we
podemos
can
aportar
contribute
desde una
from
visión de lo
the
ambiental
environmental
amplia
vision,
y desde
very
una
ample
visión de
one,
lo
and
ambiental
also
en disputa frente al
in
modelo
dispute
neoliberal y las
against
empresas
neoliberal
transnacionales.
models and transnational companies. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Danilo. And just a reminder to those of you that are joining us that there's going to be a chance to put some of your questions to the panel. So please do put questions in the chat in whichever language you feel most comfortable with, and we will try and ask as many as we can. We have about half an hour left, and I'd really like to encourage you, if you have questions, to put them in early so that we can cover them all. Sandra, I would like to come back to you in the meantime to ask really how your organization is trying to use the concept of environmental and climate justice in some of its kind of in some of its advocacy to kind of create change, either in local policies or in regional policies or even at the national level. How have you been using this concept, and do you feel that it is gaining kind of traction within the policy-making space in Guatemala?
Muchas
Thank you
gracias.
so much. Well,
Bueno, yo
first of all,
primero
I
creo
think
que
that
debo
I have to mention
mencionar de
that
que lamentablemente
unfortunately
tenemos
we have,
podríamos
we can
decir,
say,
un
is an approach,
abordaje
a
muy
limited one,
limitado, ¿no? De
of this
este
concept,
concepto visto desde
seen
la,
from
podríamos decir, desde la
the
administración
public
pública,
administration point
¿verdad?
of view.
Desde las entidades de
Justice
justicia, podría
entities, for
decir
example, legal
que es
entities,
casi
it's
nula,
nil.
¿verdad? Por ejemplo, tenemos una
We
política marco
have
de
a
cambio
framework
climático
policy
desde
of
hace muchos
climate
años que ha
change
tardado un montón para que pueda salir un plan
in
de
order to have an
acción y
action plan,
luego muy
but
recientemente en
recently in
abril del
April
2022
2022,
que ya hay un
there's
acuerdo
a
gubernativo sobre el
governmental
tema del
agreement
Fondo del Cambio
in this
Climático.
climate
Y
change
luego
fund.
resulta que
But
tenemos
then
también
we
un
also
acuerdo de
have
Escazú en el que
agreement in
Guatemala
Escazú
no lo ha
in which
ratificado. Entonces yo
Guatemala has
quería
not
mencionar
ratified. I
esto
wanted
porque
to say this
tenemos
because we have
prácticamente
practically
el abordaje
the approach
desde
from this
este
point of view
punto de las
of the
entidades
governmental entities
gubernamentales
is
muy
very limited.
limitado. Al
On the other
contrario,
hand,
creo
I
yo
think, on the
que
contrary, I
se
think it's
vuelve todo lo contrario de lo que se
against
impulsa desde la
what is
justicia
promoted on
climática en
climate
el marco
justice,
de
on the framework
la
of the
cantidad de licencias de
amount of
explotación, ¿verdad?, que
exploitation
hay en
licenses that we
Guatemala
have here in
y
Guatemala.
ese
So that
modelo
capitalist
capitalista
model
que
that
tiene
has
que
to
ver con
do with
monocultivos, caña de
monoculture,
azúcar,
sugarcane,
aceite de
palm
palma,
oil, banana.
banano, también todo el tema de las hidroeléctricas, todo el tema
Hydroelectrical
de
plants,
minerías a cielo
mining,
abierto, y en donde
where
muchos de los
many of
funcionarios
the
públicos son
public
parte, ¿no?, de
employees are part
este
of
impulso de estas
promoting
empresas.
these
Yo hago
companies.
énfasis en
I
eso
do an
porque
emphasis on this because
lamentablemente
unfortunately
tenemos
we
en
have in
Guatemala
Guatemala
mucha persecución de
a
los líderes y
persecution
lideresas,
towards the
así como en la
leaders as well as
región,
in the
¿no? O
region.
sea, somos
We are a
una región
region, a
muy
very dangerous
peligrosa,
one,
podríamos decir,
with
líderes y lideresas
leaders that are
asesinados y
being
encarcelados,
murdered or
y
in
eso también
prison,
nos
and
llama a
also
nosotros a
that
un abordaje,
calls our attention to
creo
have
yo,
approach
basándonos dentro de todo el
based
planteamiento que hace el
on what
pueblo
indigenous
indígena.
people
Entonces nos
do. So
abocamos prácticamente a los convenios
we
internacionales del
adhere
derecho de
to
los
the
pueblos
international
indígenas y desde ahí
agreements, and
hacemos
thereon what we
prácticamente un
do is
planteamiento
a political
político, ¿verdad?
plan,
Un
a
proyecto
project
político de los
plan of
pueblos
the indigenous
indígenas para
peoples to
poder
be able
hacer
to
y seguir resistiendo
keep up
en la defensa
having
por
a
sus
resistance
territorios, por
towards
el agua,
their
y de esa
territorial
manera
defense
es que
of the water.
acompañamos a las
In this sense, we
comunidades.
accompany
Se
the communities. So
vuelve tal vez no tan
it's not
agradable,
pleasant,
¿verdad?,
no, as you can
para
see,
las entidades
for the
gubernamentales, porque
governmental
como ya
entities, because
decíamos,
as I
no
already
es
said,
algo
because
que
it's
les
not going to
favorezca,
favor
¿verdad?,
them,
porque están
because
ellos
they are
siendo
being
parte
part
de esta
of
falta de
this lack
derecho
of
que las
rights that
comunidades
the
tienen.
communities
Por
have.
ejemplo,
So
tenemos una muy recientemente que tenemos ahorita
recently,
muy clara, es
there's a
una
mining
minería a cielo
company
abierto que está en el
who is
Cerro
in
Blanco,
Cerro
que está
Blanco
en el área oriental
in the
del
eastern part of the
país,
country,
y el
and
pueblo, el 87%
87%
del pueblo de Asunción
of
Mita, que es
Asunción
uno de los
Mita's
municipios,
population
dijo que no estaba de
who
acuerdo en
did
la
not
consulta, ¿verdad? Que es una
agree with
práctica
this
que estamos
practice.
promoviendo en
So
las
we are
consultas
promoting
comunitarias
these
ante
consultations
estos
uh,
modelos
against
extractivistas.
these
Pero
extractivist models.
uno
But
de los
one of the
interesados, de los
interested
primeros tres interesados en
in to
deslegitimizar
delegitimize
esa
this
consulta que se hizo a
consultation
la
done
comunidad
to the
es el
community
presidente de la
is the
nación,
president
¿verdad? O
of
sea,
this country.
tenemos al
So
presidente Yamatei,
Yamatei, the
¿verdad?, que
president,
ahorita tenemos
we
serios
have serious
problemas y
problems
conflictos aquí sociales
and
muy,
social
muy fuertes en
conflicts
relación a
regarding the
los
high
altos niveles
levels
de
of corruption
corrupción que hay
that there is
en las
in the
entidades
public
públicas y que están siendo parte
organs that are
de
part of
estos
these
modelos
extractivist
extractivistas que están
models that are
violentando los
really
derechos de los
threatening
pueblos
the rights
indígenas y
of
de
the
la población
population
en
and in
general,
general.
¿verdad?
So,
Entonces, nuestro planteamiento es más a la
so
defensa, es más al
when we talk about
empoderamiento de las
advocacy, it's
comunidades, de
empowering
las
the
mujeres, en
communities, the
donde están en
women, where
realidad
they are,
desempeñando un
and they
papel
are having a
fundamental
very important role
como
as
promotoras de
promoters
esa
of
defensa
that
de su
advocacy of
cultura
their
y de sus
culture
formas de
and
vida,
their
¿verdad? Para poder conservar
livelihood, to
los
be able
modos
to
de vida que
preserve the
todavía existen en
livelihoods that
las
still exist
comunidades,
in the
para
communities,
cuidar
also to
también
care
la
for
biodiversidad y lo poco
biodiversity.
que hay.
So,
Dentro de esta
inside this
turbulencia política
political
que hay a
turmoil
nivel
in
Guatemala,
Guatemala,
el Congreso de
the
la República en
Congress
este
right
momento
now
está
is
analizando la
analyzing
ley
or
de
the
semillas,
law, the
¿verdad?
seeds law,
Entonces, está
is
tratando
trying
de
to
limitar
limit
a los
the
pueblos
indigenous
indígenas de las
peoples
semillas
to
de
have access
miles
to
de años
seeds,
para poder todavía
millenary seeds, to
violentar
really
aún más su derecho y
limit
limitarlos,
the
¿verdad? A
population to have
tener
the
este acceso a
access to
alimentos
food
que
that
ellos
they
normalmente
normally
ya
produce
producen con sus
with
conocimientos y sus
their
sabidurías. Entonces es un peligro al
livelihood and
final,
their
se vuelve
ancestrality.
para
So this is a
nosotros
problem.
esta cooptación del
The
Estado que
state's
tenemos en Guatemala
action,
un
it's a
peligro
threat for the
para
community
las comunidades y una
and a violation
violación,
towards human
pero
rights.
ya
And
muy
it's very
visible,
visible, as
¿verdad?
you can see,
Desde este punto de vista de los
of the
derechos de los
rights of the
pueblos
indigenous
indígenas y de
peoples
la
and the
población. Entonces,
population as a whole.
creo yo, un
So
trabajo
this is
fuerte de
strong
defensa y de
work of
resiliencia y de resistencia,
advocacy,
¿verdad? Que hay
resistance,
desde
and
la población.
resilience on behalf
Y
of the
yo creo que
population.
cómo lo han ido
So
asimilando las
how has the
comunidades, yo
community
creo que hay
really
un punto
understood this? This
importante que
is
hay
very
que
important to reflect
reflexionar
on
y
because
es que estos
these
modelos
capitalist
capitalistas
models
también
have
han creado
created a
mucha
lot of
división,
division.
¿verdad?
There
Comunidades
are
en donde
communities
existe, por
where there
ejemplo,
are
una minería
mining
en
and
donde
where
hay
there is
un
a
cierto
certain
número
amount of
de
people
personas que
who
son
are part
parte
of
como
this
trabajadoras de estas
workers of these
empresas
companies,
y otro
and there's
grupo
another
que
group who's
defiende su
defending the
territorio, su
territory,
agua
the water,
y sus
and the
bosques.
forests.
En realidad
So
ha
this has
causado un
caused
confrontamiento que no
confrontations
es sano para las
that is not
comunidades,
very good for the
pero que
communities,
también
and
la
also the
población que está
population
a
who
favor
is
de la
favoring
minería o de
mining
las
and the
hidroeléctricas
hydroelectrical plants.
eh, no
They have
han
not been
logrado,
able
podríamos decir,
to
visibilizar las
visualize
grandes
the
afectaciones que
impact, the
esto tiene para
negative
la salud y
impacts that it
para
has
la
for
biodiversidad
biodiversity,
de
for
su
the
entorno.
health.
Entonces ahí
So
es
this
donde
is where
miramos
we
nosotros un
see
trabajo
a
todavía
very
fuerte
strong work
y de
and a
lucha,
fight
¿verdad? Entre las
on behalf of the
comunidades a
communities.
nivel,
We can
podríamos
say
decir,
that the
intercomunitario, intermunicipal,
inter-community,
interdepartamental. Esa
interdepartmental,
fuerza
that
es la que se
strength is
trabaja
being
para que
worked
pueda haber
on
más
to have
unión
much more
en
union in
Guatemala.
Guatemala. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Either Val, maybe I can come to you as well to ask, how are you trying to operationalize some of these concepts within the work that you do? How is it useful? I mean, Sandra talked about advocacy, resistance, resilience as being some of the core strands, and also some of this advocacy is direct, but actually some of it is about empowering local communities to sort of challenge what is happening within kind of wider public policy. How do you kind of operationalize some of these concepts or some of these issues around climate justice practically, either as an organization yourself or within the communities that you work with, to try and actually change, I guess, what's happening? Because I guess what we're hearing a lot is this is really difficult. This concept is understood, but there's some much broader, I guess, economic and social and political challenges to actually getting change happening in practice.
Consegue me ouvir agora? Ah, sim. Então, a gente
Thank you, Claire, for the
atualmente,
question.
né, a gente atua no sul, na região sul do
We
estado
are
do
in the southern
Amazonas
part of
aqui,
the Amazon region here.
mas essa
That
região ela
region
é fronteira
is
com o estado
bordered
de
with
Rondônia.
Rondônia State.
E no estado
In
de
this Rondônia
Rondônia, a gente
state,
tem
we
muitas
have a lot of
organizações
organizations, community
comunitárias e
organization, and
indígenas, né,
indigenous
que
community.
surgiram inclusive junto com a Canindé, que
They
são
are
organizações que se
organizations that
estruturaram, né, que
really
têm
joined and
uma
have a
capacidade
capacity,
muito
large
grande de
capacity
estar levando
of
o que eles puderam, né,
really
aprender, né, nesse
taking
mundo
and sharing what they've learned
de movimento, eles
regarding the
podem levar,
movement, and
inclusive, para
they
essa região do
can
sul do
take that to the
Amazonas. E o que
southern
a
part
gente
of the
tem feito
Amazon.
é um intercâmbio
It's the
mesmo dessas
learnings
comunidades,
and
né?
spreading
No
these
sul do
learnings
Amazonas
in the
são
Amazon region.
povos muito mais isolados devido à estrada,
And
né, que é a
obviously, there
Transamazônica,
are a
a
lot of
região da
people who are
Transamazônica.
living in very remote
É,
areas.
e é
It's
muito
very
difícil, né, o
difficult to
acesso
have
deles à
access to the
cidade e tudo
city,
mais.
and
E existe um
there's a
contexto muito
specific
específico.
context.
E uma
And
das formas que a
the
gente tem
way
buscado, né,
we
para
have
empoderar essas
seek to empower
comunidades,
these
muitas das
communities
vezes é
is
trazendo,
bringing, for
por exemplo, a
example,
Associação das Guerreiras
the
Indígenas do
the
Estado de
Association
Rondônia,
of
que
Guerreiras
as mulheres
Indígenas.
indígenas
It's
daqui,
called
né,
Women's
formaram uma
Warriors. They
organização
have an
e com
organization,
isso elas
and they
começaram, né, a
started
crescer
to
muito as ações
grow
delas e hoje em
with their
dia elas
association,
podem
and
ir
they
até
can really
essas
go to the
comunidades do
different
sul do Amazonas,
communities in the Amazon,
falar,
talk
né,
about
levar muitas das
what they're
vezes
doing, empowering the women.
opções que as mulheres nessa região do sul do Amazonas, muitas das vezes é, que estão aí muito sofridas pelo
Because
machismo,
many
né,
women
pela
are
coisa do
suffering due
patriarcado
to
mesmo, que é muito
chauvinism,
mais forte na
so they are
região,
teaching these
e
women,
você vê
and we can
que
see
essa
that
troca
the exchange,
de
that
amizades mesmo que elas
friendship
acabam
that
fazendo,
really
você
they're
vê aí
doing, you can
que elas se
see
empoderam
they
mais,
get
que elas começam
empowered,
a ocupar também
and they
espaços
really start to
de
work
destaque mesmo, né,
with other
dentro das
communities
comunidades ou mesmo nas cidades, né, do entorno dessas
around these
regiões.
regions. So
Então, assim, através do
through the
movimento da
movement
juventude indígena
of
de Rondônia
Juventude
também, a
Indígena de
gente
Rondônia, another
tem atuado,
movement,
né? A gente atua com o movimento das
we
guerreiras
work with
indígenas,
these
com o movimento da
guerreiras
juventude indígena,
indígenas,
e através
and
disso a gente traz, né,
through
não só
these
essas
partnerships,
mulheres, mas os jovens
we
e também
really
essas
can reach
lideranças
the
que estão
women
aí se
and the
formando, como a
youth.
Chay Suruí, por exemplo. A gente
We
tenta
try to
fazer
do
uma
a
conexão maior
connection
com essas
really with
lideranças
these
que
leaders
são
that are
inspiração muitas das
inspiration.
vezes para os indígenas, né, no contexto de indígena, que eu coloco aqui, que é o que a
This
gente
is the concept
trabalha.
that we work on,
Isso faz
and that
muita diferença,
makes a
você ter
huge
ali
difference.
alguém que eles possam enxergar nesse local de destaque, né? Que você,
So
hoje em dia é muito
it's
difícil você ver um
very
indígena ocupando,
difficult
pelo menos
to
no Brasil,
visualize the work
né? É
they're
muito
doing.
difícil ver um indígena
And it's
ocupando
very
um
difficult, for
cargo, né?
example,
Hoje
for
você
a
tem aí, por exemplo, o
person coming
Ministério
from
dos
a
Povos
community have
Indígenas, você tem, mas
a
ainda assim é
position,
uma coisa
political
que não
position.
é.
So
Existe uma
there's a
estrutura,
structure,
mas o
but
Estado
the
não dá
state really
condição
does not
para
give the
que
conditions
eles
so
possam
that they
atuar de
can
forma
act
eficaz.
accordingly.
No sul do
In the southern
Amazonas,
part of the
a
Amazon,
gente tem
we have a
muitos
lot of
casos
cases
de desrespeito aos
of
direitos humanos,
non-respect
né,
towards
quanto
the
às
human
mulheres,
rights against
ainda
women,
mais dentro das comunidades, né, a região que ali tem o povo Tenharim,
the
o povo Parintintim e o povo de
Parintintim,
Arrui,
Yahui. These
existe muita
peoples
violência contra a
are,
mulher,
they have
existe
a lot of
muito
violence
abuso
against women.
sexual, existe muita coisa assim ainda
There's a
contra as
lot of
mulheres na
things against
região.
women in the region.
Então,
So
assim, muito
recently,
recentemente, a Elda de
Elda
Arrui, né, que é uma
Yahui,
liderança da
who is a
região,
leader in the
me
region,
ligou desesperada porque
she
uma
called
parente dela tinha sido
because
violentada sexualmente.
family member
E
had
ainda assim,
been
ainda foram
uh,
ameaçar ela na casa dela. Então, assim,
affected and had
a
been
gente está
threatened.
muito próximo
So we
disso,
are
é
living
a gente também
this
ser um
very
ator direto
closely.
ali naquele momento, né? Porque a
We
gente tem um
have
advogado,
a
né? A gente faz
lawyer,
também
we do also
advocacy,
advocacy
inclusive em brigas
and
contra
fights
grandes
against
empresas,
large
né? Por exemplo, a
companies,
JBS. A
JBF,
gente
for
também,
example.
a gente atua de
We
todas as
try to
formas, tanto como
tackle
pessoa,
through
como
all the fronts
com os
with
advogados
the
que a
lawyers
gente
that
tem,
we
que muitos
have.
deles
Many are
voluntariados, né?
volunteers.
Então, assim, a
So we
gente
try
busca
to
tentar atingir de todas
seek
as formas
really
essa
to
justiça,
obtain
né?
that
Tanto
justice,
empoderando
empowering
a
the
comunidade,
community,
quanto de fato indo lá e
climate
levando
justice,
muitos
environmental
atores que
justice,
às
and
vezes
bringing many
chegam a
actors
invadir os territórios,
against
né?
many actors
Degradam,
who
fazem
are coming in
mineração,
to invade
fazem
our territories,
pesca predatória,
predatory
invadem. A
fishing,
gente
for
está
example.
atuando então
So
de todas as
we
formas
are trying to tackle all the
para, né,
fronts
levar
to
essa justiça
really
nas
take that
comunidades, né?
justice to the
E
communities,
principalmente
mainly
empoderando aquele
empowering
indivíduo que
that
vive dentro da
individual
comunidade para
inside the
que
community
ele
so that
próprio
person, so
possa sair da
subject,
sua
can
comunidade
really
e
step out of the community
brigar pelo
and
seu
fight for their
território, brigar pelo
territory
seu modo de vida, né? Que seja
and to defend
respeitado
their
isso.
well-being and livestock. livelihood.
Thank you, Idabal. That was really interesting to hear about this kind of information exchange and the lessons learned and how you kind of empower people to sort of defend their land. And I was wondering how much, I mean, given where the Amazonas is and that it sits at the kind of, that it borders, it's got many kind of it's transnational in terms of its placement. How far do you see differences between, or collaboration even, between the different, I guess, national governments that all have an interest in the Amazonas, and how much is that affecting the work you do, or is that an opportunity, or is that another risk in terms of some of these questions around justice?
Então, a região que a gente
The
atua,
region
ela
where
não
we
tem
act has
fronteira
not
direta
a direct
com...
border
Porque é isso, o estado do
because
Amazonas é
the
gigantesco, né?
state,
É
the
muito
Amazon
grande
state
o
is
estado do
huge, as
Amazonas.
you
Então,
know.
assim,
So
a
the
região que a
region
gente
where we
atua, ela
act
faz
has
fronteira com o
border
estado de
with
Rondônia
Rondônia state
e o
and
estado do
Acre
Acre.
state.
Então, ela
So
não
it
chega na
doesn't
fronteira.
route
O
the
estado de
border.
Rondônia, onde a
In
gente atua,
Rondônia,
ele
where we
tem
act,
ali uma
it's
proximidade
very nearby
faz fronteira com
with
a
Bolivia.
Bolívia, né? E a
Now
gente não tem, a gente vê
we
como uma
see that as an
oportunidade
opportunity,
muito
huge
grande mesmo,
opportunity
né? A gente juntar essas
to
forças, né, como
gather those
aliados,
strengths as partners,
mas
but
a
we do
gente
not
não tem
have
proximidade,
any
né? Não
proximity.
existe
There's
essa
no
proximidade
closeness
com a
with
Bolívia, por
Bolivia, for
exemplo.
example. We do not share anything. But
Mas é
this
um
is an
ator que
actor that
poderia ser
should be
muito,
very,
né,
very
favorecer
important and could
muito
help us really
a proteção, né, dessas unidades,
protecting these
desses
areas,
indígenas
these
aqui da região.
indigenous areas in the region. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you. And maybe that one of the comments that you made there, and maybe I can turn to either Maria Cecilia or David to comment on this, was really about how a lot of the people working on these questions are doing so as volunteers. And I'm interested in how much funding you feel is available to support this work. How much do you feel you can get access to resources, I guess both monetary resources and human resources, in order to support the work that your organizations do on environment and climate justice? How visible is it, and how far do you feel that the needs of the different communities or the different kind of policy needs are being met with sort of resources and funding? And either Maria Cecilia or David, you're very welcome to comment on this.
Si me permites,
May I,
David, por
David?
favor. Mira, creo que tenemos básicamente tres
Basically,
fuentes de
we have three
recursos, ¿no?
sources.
Los provenientes del Estado, los
Those
de
that
la
come from the
cooperación
state,
internacional y
international
los recursos
cooperation, and our own
propios,
resources.
lo autogestionario. Lo que
The
predomina en
predominant
Bolivia ahorita en
in
las
Bolivia
organizaciones
are
sociales,
social
bueno, al menos
organizations,
con las
at
que estoy
least
más en
the ones
contacto,
we're in
estoy
contact with,
trabajando, regantes, algunos comités de agua,
some water committees.
es la
This is the
autogestión, ¿no?
self-management.
Sí se
We do
obtienen
obtain
algunos pequeños
some
recursos
funds
de contraparte, que son a
that
veces
are on
donaciones de otras
donations coming from
organizaciones no
other
gubernamentales, no de los estados,
non-governmental
porque la cooperación
organizations, because the
normalmente es de
cooperation
estado a
is state
estado y no
to state,
llega a
and
estas
they do not arrive
organizaciones
to these
pequeñas,
small
entonces ahí se da
organizations.
otro tipo de alianzas
So
con
there we have
organizaciones no
other partnership with
gubernamentales a nivel
NGOs at
internacional, a
international
veces
level, sometimes
Canadá,
Canada, United
Estados Unidos
States,
o
or Europe,
Europa, que
that really
apoyan estos
support
pequeños
these
esfuerzos
small
con
efforts
pequeños
with
montos
small
para
amounts to
construir
build
una batería de baños ecológicos en una
ecological
escuela en
bathrooms in a
Cochabamba,
school in
¿no?
Cochabamba, for
Y
example.
que se
And
construye con
it's
trabajo
built with community
comunitario,
work,
con
with
aporte voluntario de algunos ingenieros, pero que
some
está diseñado
engineers, that
para
is also already
cosechar
designed
lluvias,
to
para poder hacer un
really
uso
make the
eficiente del
use
agua. A veces
of
se
water
combinan con proyectos
efficiently combined
de
with
riego, ¿no?
irrigation
Me está
projects,
trabajando mucho la Fundación
for
Abril con
example,
el compañero Oscar
Fundación
Rivera.
Abril.
Eso
This,
por
on the
un
one
lado, ¿no?
hand,
Ese
this
tipo de
type of
financiamiento, y
financing,
como te digo, es
as
muy
you know, it's very
pequeño,
small,
pero
but
se pueden
things
hacer
can be done.
pequeños proyectos que muestran que es posible otra manera de gestionar el recurso con participación de la comunidad, con involucramiento, que puede ser sostenible, etc. De parte del Estado y de la cooperación internacional, lamentablemente los recursos son muy limitados. Primero que en Bolivia tenemos el nivel central, tenemos 9 departamentos y más de 330 municipios, alrededor de 337. De esos, el presupuesto nacional está concentrado un 80% en el nivel central y aproximadamente un 20% del presupuesto nacional se distribuye a los municipios. Imagínense 330 municipios con 20% del presupuesto, más universidades y gobernaciones. Entonces, realmente los recursos son mínimos, ¿no? Y no alcanzan para desarrollar muchas veces ni siquiera acciones de emergencia, como ahorita que los municipios, una tercera parte de los municipios de Bolivia se han declarado en emergencia y algunos en desastre por las sequías que estamos sufriendo. Una tercera parte, más de 130 municipios en las últimas semanas. El día de ayer se ha reunido el Consejo Nacional de Autonomías y ha declarado que van a crear un fondo que va a prestar recursos para atender la crisis climática y para atender el agua. Ahora habrá que ver cuáles son los criterios de préstamo de esos recursos, ¿no? Y qué municipios van a poder acceder a estos fondos o qué instituciones. Creo que va a ser muy limitado y por la capacidad de endeudamiento de muchos de estos. Y la cooperación internacional lamentablemente no puede llegar ni a los municipios ni a las organizaciones sociales, sino es a través del filtro del nivel central que va canalizando los recursos directamente a favor de municipios más afines al gobierno que son del partido de gobierno, lamentablemente. Y esta discrecionalidad en el manejo de los recursos es injusta, ¿no? Porque hay muchos municipios que no son del oficialismo, pero que requieren los recursos. Las ONGs que son más críticas a las políticas del gobierno no pueden recibir recursos, están muy limitadas. Entonces, creo que el acceso a los recursos financieros es un problema. Incluso ahora estamos en una etapa de transición en la que se está planteando incluso una regresión a etapas anteriores a la guerra del agua en Bolivia. Hace unas semanas tuvimos un foro con algunos compañeros para ver el tema del agua y CEMAPA, la empresa municipal de Cochabamba, la recuperada después de la guerra del agua, planteó que estaba pensando hacer una alianza público-privada para generar recursos. La Paz, hace unos días igual, en un pronunciamiento ha planteado que se va a aprobar una ley de alianzas público-privadas, que no es otra cosa que sociedades de economía mixta, ¿no? Porque no van a entrar los privados a aportar recursos si no tienen la posibilidad de generar un rédito o de no lucrar con los servicios. Y esto es por la falta de recursos, ¿no? O en algunos casos, por una mala administración de los recursos, ¿no? En el caso de los municipios más grandes. Entonces, creo que hay una situación crítica en ese tema, pero bueno, hay que fortalecer las alianzas internacionales con las organizaciones no gubernamentales. Ojalá los otros estados y podamos ir revirtiendo esto, ¿no? La verdad es que la creatividad, el compromiso han demostrado que a pesar de la falta de recursos económicos es posible también generar cambios en lo micro.
Thank you, Maria. We're nearly closing, and before I say some final words, I do want to come to you, David and Danilo. Maybe I can ask you both the same question, and that would really be, if you could see one kind of really change happen within at the national government level in Paraguay or in Colombia, what one thing would you really think would change the status and the ability to address kind of climate and environmental justice that you've so clearly set out the need for in this panel discussion? If you had to choose one thing, what would really be the thing that can make a big difference in the short term to really getting these conversations happening, not just within civil society and NGO discussions, but actually at that at that political and national level.
No está abiertos.
I think they're muted.
¿Ahora me escuchan?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Ok, gracias.
Thank you.
Disculpen. Le decía a Claire que
Claire,
en
in
el
the
caso de
case of
Paraguay
Paraguay,
estamos viviendo un
we're
momento
living a
político
political
bastante
moment, it's a very
difícil,
difficult one,
bastante
very complicated
complicado,
one,
con el regreso, con el
with the
regreso de
return
la
of the
derecha.
right
Hoy
wing
la
to the power.
derecha no
Today,
tiene
the right
una
wing does not
mirada
have a territorial
territorial, no
view,
tiene una mirada
a community
comunitaria.
view, so the
Los fondos
funds
no
are not
están
being
disponibles
available
para ayuda
to
en cuanto
help
a crisis
regarding climate
climática.
crisis.
El Estado
In
paraguayo
Paraguay,
no tiene la capacidad
they do not have
técnica
the
ni
technical capacity
económica
nor economic
para enfrentar
capacity
los
to
efectos de la
really
crisis
face the
climática
climate
en las
crisis
comunidades.
effects.
Hoy
Now
las
the communities
comunidades están
are working,
trabajando por sus propios,
they
creando sus
create
propios
their own
recursos, ¿verdad?
resources.
La autogestión es uno de
Self-management, for
los
example,
elementos fundamentales que hoy
that the
las comunidades
communities
están llevando y
are practicing
practicando para
to be
poder
able to
sobrevivir
survive
de estos efectos
these
y
effects
para
and to
poder
be able to
instalar todo lo que tiene que ver la
install
justicia climática en los
climate justice
territorios
in the
a
territories
través de
through
reuniones, encuentros,
meetings,
debates
grassroots
comunitarios, ¿verdad? El rol nuestro es
meetings, and our
acompañar
role is to
ese
accompany them in this
proceso,
process and to
entregar
deliver the
herramientas
tools
para poder
to be
instalar
able
el
to
concepto de
install the
justicia
concept of climate
climática.
justice and environmental
Como
justice.
bien decía
As Danilo
Danilo, no
already
podemos
said,
hablar de justicia
we
climática
cannot
si no
see
hablamos de justicia
climate justice
social,
if
de
we do not talk
justicia
about
económica y de justicia
social,
de
economic, and
género,
gender
en donde
justice.
las mujeres tienen un
Women
rol
have a
muy
very important
importante
role
en todo este
in this
proceso.
process.
En cuanto al
Regarding
acceso de los
access to the
recursos, en cuanto a su audiencia,
resources,
nosotros somos una organización no gubernamental,
we
por
also
lo
have an
tanto no
NGO.
recibimos fondos del
It's not government
gobierno.
funds.
Hoy en
These funds
Paraguay
are coming through the NGO,
están
and
muy escasos
it's very scarce, the funds here in Paraguay.
los fondos de las agencias
The
de
cooperation
cooperación
agency
para
funds are
acompañar
scarce also to be able to
tipo
accompany
de
these
proceso.
processes.
Es por eso que es
This process that is
fundamental la
fundamental
unión
to
de las
be united
organizaciones a nivel
at the
nacional, a
national,
nivel local y a
local,
nivel
and global
global,
level
regional y
to
global,
be
para poder
able to have
acceder
access
a
to
recursos para
resources,
poder
to be able to
acompañar
accompany
estos
these
procesos que
processes
estamos llevando adelante a
that
nivel
we're doing
nacional,
at a
a
national
nivel
level
regional,
and
¿verdad?
regional
Y
level too.
a nivel global también estamos
And
sinergizando.
we're trying to create a synergy.
El Estado
But the
paraguayo no tiene
Paraguayan
ni una
state has
visión
not
de su
any
trazabilidad.
vision about
Me
their
atrevo a
responsibility.
decir todos sus apoyos
All their
económicos
economic
que van
support
en apoyo al modelo
is led
productivo
to the
siempre
productive
está
model,
basado
is allocated to the
en
productive
semillas
model
genéticamente modificadas, en distribución de
regarding pesticide
pesticidas. No hay así
distribution.
como un
There's not
cambio de
a shift
paradigma
in
y
the
decir, no,
paradigm.
vamos a cambiar esta
If
visión,
saying that we're
vamos a
going to
una
change this
visión
vision, we're going towards
restauradora
a
del territorio y vamos
restorative vision.
a
No, we're going to
acompañar a las
accompany the
organizaciones que están
organizations that
hoy
are working and implementing,
implementando
for example,
sistemas productivos
productive systems
que
that
respeten
respect the
la
nature. That's not their
naturaleza,
point of
que
view,
respeten la tradición,
that
que respeten la
respects the
cosmovisión,
cosmovision
¿verdad?
tradition,
Porque
because
hoy el
the
Estado
Paraguayan
paraguayo está
Strait
penetrando en
is
comunidades
entering the
indígenas,
communities,
llevando una visión occidental
taking
en
a
cuanto
Western
a
vision
la
regarding the
producción
production,
y no
and it's not
rescatando los
rescuing
saberes
the ancestral
ancestrales, ¿verdad?
knowledge
Y el
and the
manejo de ese
management of
territorio
these
que
territories
tienen
that
las
these communities
comunidades y
have
que hoy lo están
that are
perdiendo, ya
being
sea
lost
por
due
la
to
pérdida
the
del
loss
territorio
of
o
territory
por
or due to the
introducir
fact of
conceptos
introducing
occidentales,
Western
¿verdad?
concepts
Como
like
falsas
a false
soluciones.
solution.
Esto va muy
This
de la
is
mano
aligned.
también, y me olvidé, no me referí a las falsas soluciones frente a la crisis climática.
Here in
Aquí en Paraguay
Paraguay,
está muy instalado todo lo que tiene que ver con el
there's a
hidrógeno
lot of
verde,
green
con las
hydrogen,
plantaciones forestales, con los
forestry,
agrocombustibles
plantation,
que ellos le llaman
or,
biocombustibles, para nosotros
or
son
fuels that
agrocombustibles,
really they call it biofuels, but it's
y
agrofuels. And
últimamente
lately,
con los
with
créditos
carbon
de
credits.
carbono, ¿verdad? Que son
These are
falsas
false
soluciones y que
solutions.
también nosotros
And
eso
we
estamos
are
trabajando
working
con
together
las
with the
comunidades,
communities in
esas
these
falsas
false
soluciones y
solutions,
cómo
how to
salvaguardar
safeguard the
el
territory,
territorio de esas falsas soluciones y cómo
and
nosotros
how
podemos
we can
demostrar
really
que las
show that the
soluciones
real
reales
solutions
están
are
basadas en el
based on
buen
the good
manejo del
management of the
territorio, en la
territory.
restauración del territorio,
And
y eso
this has a cost,
tiene un costo
human
humano,
cost,
tiene un costo
and
económico,
also
¿verdad? Que
economic cost
debemos
that we have to
resolver
solve
para que
really in
las
order
comunidades
for the
puedan
communities to really
realmente restaurar el
restore the
territorio, que es lo
territory,
que lleva. Nosotros
recover it.
necesitamos
We
restaurar el
want to restore
territorio
the
para
territory
devolverle
to
la
give back
vida a esas
life to the
comunidades y
communities
devolvernos
and
la
to
vida
give back
entre
life
todos los seres
to all
humanos.
human
No
beings,
solamente
not
en
only in
Paraguay,
Paraguay,
eso tiene que ser a nivel local, a
at
nivel regional y a
local,
nivel global.
regional
El cambio
level.
de
The
paradigma es urgente,
paradigm
el
shift is
cambio de la
urgent.
narrativa es
The narrative
urgente
shift
y el
is
cambio de las
urgent, and
prácticas
also
sustentables
the
es
practices
urgente.
are urgent.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, I kind of that last sentence, you know, really that the paradigm shift is really going to be essential in order to kind of address these questions. And your point about false solutions is one that we talk about quite a lot in the Environment of Peace report about, you know, as we move through the green transition, it's essential that we understand the kind of peace and security implications of kind of environmental policies, which potentially with good intent, but unless the full consequences are thought through in terms of some of the social consequences and the ultimate environmental consequences, that they won't produce the results in which they're intended to. So that point is very well made. Danilo, I'm conscious that lots of people have asked questions just as we're reaching the end of the conversation, but maybe I can ask you one of them instead of the original question, and that's really a question that's come in saying, I guess a lot of this conversation has been about the negative impacts of private enterprise in terms of some of the extractive industries and in terms of some of those socioeconomic models. But has there been any positive contributions from kind of the private sector in trying to support this pursuit of environmental justice or climate justice? Can you see that there is that there could be a partnership with the private sector within the region, or does that not feel like something which is currently happening either in Colombia or wider?
Gracias,
Thank you,
Claire. Yo creo que
Claire.
es una
I think it's a very
difícil
difficult
pregunta, en
question.
tanto
It
es
is
claro
clear,
que, como María
as
Cecilia
Maria Cecilia already
señalaba, la
mentioned,
intención
the
del sector
intention of the private
privado en
sector
términos
in general
generales
terms,
es la acumulación
and
de
also
capital.
it's in the
Y eso no lo hablamos desde una
capital
perspectiva tampoco
perspective,
teórica, sino a la luz de lo que ha significado la
because this is the
participación del
participation of
sector
the private
privado
sector
en lo que
in what
tiene que
has
ver
to
con la
do with the
cuestión
environmental
ambiental.
aspects.
Y María
And Maria
Cecilia hacía
Cecilia
una
did a very
relación
important
importantísima
relationship
con lo
with
que
what
fue
happened
la
with the
famosa guerra
famous
del agua
war of the
en
water in
Bolivia,
Bolivia,
hablando acá de
talking
paz y
about
de
peace
guerra
and war,
y de los bienes
and the natural
naturales
goods
como
is part
parte
of
de esa
that
disputa.
dispute.
Sobre lo que significa
What does
hoy
this
también
mean
y en
today
muchos
in many
países
countries
del mundo que
worldwide
lograron la
that they were able to
remunicipalización de las empresas públicas
municipalize
de agua, por
the
ejemplo,
public
de las empresas que habían
works
sido tomadas por los
of
privados,
the
como el caso de
case of
Cochabamba con la
Cochabamba,
Bechtel,
or in
o en
Colombia,
Colombia
for
el
example, the
caso
case of
de las empresas como
companies
Unión
like Unión
Fenosa, que se han
Fenosa
apropiado de toda la
that
energía, de la distribución de la
have
energía en los
really
lugares más
approached,
empobrecidos del
have
país, donde la
gathered
gente no tiene
really
acceso
all the
a la
power.
energía, no
There
tiene
are a lot of
derecho a la
people living there that
energía
do not
como
have access
consecuencia de la
to water
desaparición o más bien de la
due
toma del sector
to
público
the
por
act
parte
of
del
the
sector
private
privado.
sector to take
Hablando a
advantage
partir de la
over the public
experiencia
sector.
y de lo que hemos visto como tendencia
So we
general
can
en
see a
América
trend in Latin
Latina y el
America and the
Caribe,
Caribbean.
creo
I
que es
think it's very
difícil
difficult to
pensar que el
think
sector
that the private
privado, como
sector,
está
as
diseñada la
it is
arquitectura de
designed,
participación de ese sector privado, ofrezca
it's
algún
difficult for
beneficio
that
para los
to offer
pueblos.
a
Y
benefit.
claro, no podemos de alguna manera
We
satanizar a
cannot
la empresa privada
the
o generar
private
una
companies,
visión
we
de
cannot
todas
see it
las
as a
empresas
devil.
privadas como algo que abstractamente es demoníaco
It's
o que nosotros
a
tenemos que
concept
criticar
that
de por sí. Pero
it's
hablando a
embedded,
partir
but
de la experiencia, no
based on the
encuentro
experience,
una
I cannot
experiencia de
see an experience of
participación
participation of the
del
private
sector
sector
privado en el
in the
manejo de
management
los
of
bienes
the
comunes que haya resultado
goods that's
exitosa
been
para los
successful for
pueblos,
the
es decir,
people,
que haya resultado benéfica para
for the
los
people.
pueblos,
So
porque esa contradicción de
the
el beneficio de
benefit
convertir los bienes
of
privados en
converting the
mercancía para
goods
el
for
beneficio empresarial
merchandise
nos lleva a
for
que sea muy
the private
difícil
sector,
ese
it's very
relacionamiento.
difficult to apply
Yo creo que
this.
al
At
mismo
the same
tiempo,
time,
y lo decía yo en mi respuesta anterior, el sector
private
privado cuando se
sector,
relaciona con los
when
bienes
it's
comunes tiene
related
una
to
gran
the common goods,
participación del
has
capital
a large
transnacional y en eso tenemos que
participation with the
tener
transnational
siempre
capital.
mucho
We have to
cuidado,
take
porque
care of
ese
that
capital
because that
transnacional
national
que
capital
está dentro
that
del
is
sector
inside the
privado para la
private sector
relación
or
con
the
los bienes
relationship with
comunes,
the common
también ha
goods has
construido
built
un sistema de impunidad,
impunity
que es
system.
una arquitectura de la impunidad a través de
So
la
this
cual
system
se ha
is which has
beneficiado también
benefited
de construir
in
política
order
pública
to
en nuestros
build public
países.
policies
Y
in our
esa
countries.
política
That public
pública
policies
no ha
has not
sido
been
generada para
generated
el
for the
beneficio de los
benefit
pueblos
of
a
the
través del manejo de
peoples
los bienes
through the
comunes.
common goods.
Cuando el aparato corporativo
When the corporate
transnacional influencia
apparatus
la construcción de
impacts
política
the public
pública,
policies,
lo que
what we
vemos es
see
escenarios de despojo.
is
Yo soy respetuoso de las visiones que creen
very
en las
negative
alianzas
scenarios.
entre lo público y lo privado, por ejemplo, pero también
I
creo
think
que
that
a la luz de los
faced
hechos,
with the
las alianzas entre
facts,
lo público y lo
these
privado
partnerships,
han sido
public-private partnerships,
no han
have not been
resultado,
very
no han llegado a
effective.
buen término. Habría que pensar
We
más bien
should
las
think
alianzas de lo
about
público y lo
the
público, de lo público y lo
public and
comunitario, que quizás
community
nos pueden
alliances
entregar
that can
otras
give us
claves de
another piece of
cooperación y sobre
cooperation
todo de
and also of
integración entre
integration
unos
among
pueblos de
the
una región
peoples
que
of a region
necesitan cada vez
that
más
need to
fortalecerse
strengthen
y
and to strengthen the state
fortalecer al Estado como el
as the
garante de lo
guarantor of the
público
public
y obviamente
goods.
esa es
And
una
this is
disputa
a different
diferente y
dispute.
es qué se
What
disputa
is
dentro del
disputed
Estado
in
para
the
que
state in
se
order to
construya la
build
política
public
pública
policies
desde la visión de
from
los
the vision of
pueblos
the
y no desde
peoples?
las oficinas de
And
los estados, que pasa muchas
what happens
veces
really
en
in
nuestros
this
contextos
very a
reales,
lot in our
pero hay que
context, but we have to
fortalecerlo
strengthen that.
también.
Back to you, Claire.
Thank you. We're already over time, and I know we started late, but I think I should try to wrap up. I mean, first of all, thank you so much to all the panelists for the really rich interventions, some of which are talking about some very challenging questions. We've been talking about some of the abuses of human rights and some of the violence that we see, that you have seen against different people, different communities that you work with. So thank you for sharing those kind of perspectives. I mean, I think there's huge, I've got so many notes from the discussion, but I wanted to kind of just summarize a little bit what I felt really came out so strongly. I mean, the first was that this deep kind of common understanding across the different panelists about this concept of climate environmental justice, really about being about nature, about living in balance and harmony with nature, and how often the concept of justice, the kind of Western concept of climate justice doesn't really cover everything that is really understood and felt within the Latin American region in terms of what real kind of environment and climate justice is. And often it can be kind of narrowed into legal concepts, but actually there's a much more kind of spiritual concept almost about human well-being that really came out today. It really came out that a lot of this is about access to territory, but it's about also access to healthy territory, access to a dignified life, access to kind of, a good sort of a community, and that really came out strongly, as did some of the, once you start understanding kind of this perspective as nature I think it was Ideval that talked about, you know, nature is all powerful at the top, and we cannot control nature, and human beings are foolish to kind of think so. Really came this intersection of food, water, security, climate, how these things are holistic and should be seen as one and not separate questions when we talk about them. And then also how climate justice really is about not just advocacy of the concept, but advocacy for the people that are defending the concept and defending those territories and defending these traditional ways and practices. And then I think I really heard some of the challenges that are faced in trying to advance this, some of the challenges of this being understood and conceptualized within public policy, but also in terms of some of the kind of paradigm shifts that is needed, and that's really a paradigm shift away from some of the socio-economic systems which are in place and which will be, you know, there's a huge challenge to try and address those inbuilt processes and practices that within different countries. But I did also kind of hear, like we talked about, this is feasible, there is hope, this is kind of communities can inspire one another. And there's a real sense of partnerships kind of, you know, I think Danilo talked about the partnership between those people looking for environmental justice, but also social justice and economic justice, and how kind of inequality and injustice and environmental injustice is also around kind of you can partner with organizations that are fighting for other kind of rights and justice in the region, but also then kind of between communities and then within the kind of global NGO network, how partnerships are kind of giving both resources but also access to information and kind of inspiration to sort of empower communities and organizations to be sort of challenging some of the practices that they're faced with. And so I kind of feel, despite it being a very difficult topic and a lot of it being, you know, very difficult to hear about how hard it is on the ground, that there was a lot of hope that came out of some of your perspectives on how this concept can be used for kind of positive change and some of the opportunities there are to work together and to work across regional to national organizations to try and kind of bring about action and genuine change. So thank you so much for your perspectives. Thanks to those that joined online. I'm sorry that some of the questions came in too late for us to cover, but I hope that this was a useful session, and thanks so much to Forum Civ for organizing. Carlos, I don't know if you want to say anything more before we end.
No, Claire, muchas gracias.
Claire,
Creo
thank
que
you
tú
so
ya
much. I think you covered
cerraste
it very
muy bien.
well. It's a very
Simplemente
important
de
summary.
nuevo
I would
darle
like to
las
thank
gracias
each
a
one of
nuestras y
you. I would
nuestros
like to thank the
panelistas, David,
panelists, David,
Sandra,
Sandra, Danilo, Maria
Cecilia
Cecilia,
y
Deval.
Deval.
Thank you
Muchas
so
gracias, muito
much.
obrigado
Muito obrigado
por
for
habernos
coming here
acompañado, por
today,
habernos
for
retratado, abierto una
really
pequeña
opening a
ventana al trabajo que hacen,
window on what you
al
do,
contexto
taking
en
us
el
to a
cual tienen estos
context and
desafíos
understanding the
y estas
challenges and
oportunidades.
opportunities
Y
that you have.
como tú ya lo
As
planteaste,
you
creo que
already
esta es
mentioned, Claire,
una
I
pequeña
think
puntada
it's
en
just
seguir
a very,
pudiendo
very good summary,
facilitar
and this is
espacios de
important
tejer
thing to have
conjuntamente
these spaces to
conocimiento,
share the
opiniones,
comments,
ideas,
ideas,
propuestas.
proposals.
Y desde
And from
Forum Civ
Forum Civ,
estamos
we
totalmente
are
abiertas y
open
abiertos a que podamos seguir
to
teniendo estos
continue in these
espacios de diálogo y de
discussions
construcción conjunta
and
desde la
from
sociedad
civil
civil de
society to
alternativas
really
para nuestra
understand different
región.
alternatives for our region. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a
Thank
ti,
you
Claire.
very
Muchas
much,
gracias
Claire.
a todas y
Thank
a
you
todos
all.
quienes
For those
asistieron
who are
y
here in the
en
call,
una
and
próxima
we will
esperamos
have
volvernos a ver y a
another
conversar.
meeting, and hopefully in the future.
Muchas
Thank you so
gracias.
much. Have
Buen
a
día.
wonderful day.
Adiós.
Hasta pronto. Adiós.